Section 1. The World That Never Sleeps. There is something deeply comforting about a world that always exists. A world where the lights on Spooner Street never really go out. Where the drunken clam is always a short walk away. And the smell of something Peter is almost certainly burning in the kitchen drifts through the neighborhood like a warm, familiar haze. A world that has been running continuously since January 31st, 1999, when a family of six first appeared on television screens across America and immediately started behaving in ways that nobody expected a family on television to behave. That world, of course, belongs to the Griffins. Peter, Lois, Meg, Chris, Stewie, and Brian. A family that has somehow survived nuclear disasters, time travel paradoxes, alternate dimensions, the physical and spiritual death of at least one of its members, several brushes with actual murder, and more than a few encounters with a man-sized chicken who nobody has ever satisfactorily explained. Tonight, we are going to sit with all of it. Every strange corner of this world that the show never fully illuminated. Every question that got raised in one episode and quietly forgotten by the next. Every shadow that lingered at the edges of jokes that were technically funny but somehow left something behind when the laughter faded. This is not a story about what Family Guy got wrong or what it got right. This is a story about what it left open. What it planted in the ground and never came back to water. What it whispered in one episode and then pretended it never said. Because Family Guy, for all of its chaos and randomness and willful disregard for continuity, has accumulated over 2 decades worth of genuinely unresolved threads. And when you pull them all together, when you line them up one after another in the quiet hours, they form something that starts to feel less like a cartoon and more like a place with its own deep, strange history that nobody was ever fully in charge of. We are going to walk through that history tonight, slowly and carefully, the way you walk through an old house in the dark, running your hand along the walls, feeling for doorways that the daylight keeps hidden. The town is called Quahog. It sits in Rhode Island, which the show has confirmed more times than any other single fact about it. It is modeled, at least loosely, on the real city of Cranston. Its streets include Spooner Street, Maple Street, and several others that show up when the plot requires them and vanish again when it does not. The town has a news station, a bar, a church, a hospital, a brewery, a high school named after the actor James Woods, a grocery store, a steakhouse that Peter has patronized and been banned from more times than anyone has counted. A quaint main street that gets destroyed and rebuilt so regularly that the contractors who work there must be the wealthiest people in the state. It is a town that functions by its own rules, and those rules are not always consistent, and that inconsistency is not always a flaw. Sometimes it is a clue. Sometimes the show is telling you something through the cracks between what it shows you and what it does not. The Griffin family home sits at 31 Spooner Street. It is a 2-story house, yellow exterior, modest garden, 2-car garage. It has been on fire, broken into, transported through time, visited by Death himself, and used as the staging ground for at least 3 separate attempts at world domination. It has a living room, a kitchen, a dining room, a basement that sometimes has a finished appearance and sometimes does not, bedrooms on the 2nd floor, and somewhere in Chris's room, accessible through his closet, a dimension of menace that we will be spending a considerable amount of time exploring later tonight. The family that lives here has had more than 300 episodes to develop. And in those 300-plus episodes, more lore has accumulated than any single viewer watching any single episode would be able to detect. Because the show does not wave flags at its mysteries. It slides them in through the side door. A line of dialogue that seems like a throwaway joke, but turns out to be the only reference the show ever makes to something enormous. A background detail that recontextualizes everything you thought you knew about a character. A moment that happens once and then the show walks away from it like it tripped and is hoping you did not notice. So before we close our eyes and let the hum of this world carry us somewhere soft and restful, let us take one long, slow look at everything that Quahog has been keeping from us. And if you are watching this from somewhere in the world right now, in whatever corner of the earth you have settled into for the night, drop a comment below and tell me where you are and what time it is. I love knowing where these videos find people. And if this is the kind of content you want to keep finding in your feed, go ahead and subscribe because there is a lot more where this is coming from. Now, let us begin. Before we move forward, I want to pause here and ask you something. Drop a comment below telling me where in the world you are watching this right now and what time it is where you are. I read every single one of those comments, and I genuinely love knowing where these videos find people. Whether it is 2 in the afternoon and you are procrastinating, or 3 in the morning and you are the only person awake in your house, or somewhere in between, let me know. It makes this feel less like a video and more like a conversation, which is really what I want it to be. And while you are down there, hit subscribe. It keeps this channel going, and it means the next time I disappear into the lore of something like this, it shows up in your feed. Now, let us truly begin. Section 2. The Chicken Problem. What is Ernie? Where did he come from? And why does he never die? There is a chicken. You know this. If you have seen more than 4 episodes of Family Guy in your life, you know that at some point, unpredictably, a giant chicken will appear. Not a cartoon chicken. Not a chicken the size of a dog or even the size of a large dog. A chicken the size of a full-grown adult human man standing upright, dressed in ordinary clothes, capable of complex locomotion, capable of driving cars, capable of boarding commercial aircraft, capable of surviving what should be fatal injuries with only a brief pause before opening one eye and watching the hero walk away. His name, it turns out, is Ernie. We learn this during the 3rd major fight sequence, in the episode where he and Peter finally, temporarily, resolve their differences over dinner and his wife says his name aloud. His wife is also a giant chicken. Her name is Nicole. They have children. One of those children attends the same preschool as Stewie Griffin, which means that somewhere in Quahog, in a preschool that we never visit, there is a class of toddlers that contains at least one baby chicken of human proportions, sitting at a small chair, probably eating paste, completely unremarked upon by any teacher or administrator. The feud between Peter and Ernie begins, officially, with a coupon. This is revealed in the Season 2 episode, Da Boom. Ernie gives Peter a coupon. The coupon is expired. Peter does not take this well. He attacks the chicken. The chicken attacks back. The fight escalates into something that involves structural damage to multiple buildings, at least one airborne segment, and what appears to be genuine mortal injury to Ernie, who then, after Peter has walked away satisfied, opens one eye. The show does this every time. Peter wins, Peter leaves, Ernie opens his eye. The message is always the same. This is not over. Now. The first mystery here is not why Peter attacks a chicken over an expired coupon. The first mystery is why there is a giant chicken in Quahog at all, and why nobody except Peter seems particularly bothered by this. Ernie walks around town, he has a social life, he has a home. He has a wife and children, and presumably some form of employment, because he is always wearing clothes that suggest someone with a disposable income and a reason to leave the house in the morning. He is not hiding. He is not contained. He is simply a giant anthropomorphic chicken living in a mid-sized Rhode Island city, and the only person who has ever tried to kill him for it is Peter Griffin. There is one attempted explanation buried in the show, though it is presented so casually that you could miss it entirely if you were not paying attention. In the Season 9 episode, New Kidney in Town, Doctor, Hartman, the Griffin family's physician, mentions offhandedly that he once attempted to clone a chicken in his lab, and that the experiment produced what he calls a hostile man-sized chicken, and that this creature escaped from his facility. Peter hears this story and says that they need to have a conversation, but that conversation never happens. It is one of the most tantalizing drop threads in the entire series. Was Ernie created in Dr. Hartman's lab? Is he a scientific accident? Does he have some awareness of his own unnatural origins? Does that awareness explain anything about the ferocity with which he fights? The Hartman angle does not fully close the loop because Ernie has a wife. He has children. He has a history with Quagmire that predates the coupon incident, since Ernie's appearance during the blind ambition fight seems motivated by something personal, beyond just the expired paper. If he is a lab experiment, he is a lab experiment who has integrated into society, built a family, and developed a specific, sustained grudge against one particular human man. That is a lot of psychological complexity for something that started as a failed cloning attempt. There is a second layer to the timeline problem, which is that the show has actually shown us two different origin points for the feud. In Da Boom, we see the coupon incident as a flashback. Ernie hands Peter a coupon. The coupon is expired. Peter attacks. Simple. But in the later episode, Meet the Quagmires, Peter travels back in time to the 1980s and accidentally punches Ernie in the face at a dance. Peter is dancing, he swings his arm wrong, and he connects with Ernie's face. Ernie starts to get angry, but a companion stops him and says, "Whoa, calm down. You're probably never going to see him again." Except he does see him again. About a decade and a half later, at a location where Ernie offers him a coupon that happens to be expired. So the question becomes, does Ernie know who Peter is when he hands him that coupon? Does he recognize the man who punched him at a dance 15 years ago and consciously hand him something invalid, knowing what will happen? Is the coupon not an accident at all, but a deliberate provocation from a chicken who has been waiting patiently for an excuse to settle an old score? If that reading is correct, then the entire feud is technically Ernie's doing, not Peter's. Peter threw the first punch, but he did it accidentally in a moment of social enthusiasm with no malice. Ernie waited years, chose his moment, handed a piece of paper to a man who he knew would be unable to receive bad news gracefully, and let chaos do the rest. That is not the behavior of a random lab accident. That is strategy. The immortality question sits at the center of everything. Ernie has been killed, by any reasonable standard of the word, multiple times. He has been dropped from enormous heights. He has had his head slammed into a photocopier repeatedly. He has been hit by vehicles. He has been fed through airplane engine propellers and survived not only the physical trauma, but also the indignity of it. The propeller sequence is particularly notable because it ends with only his leg visible, moving, which means that what we are seeing is a chicken who has had his entire upper body destroyed by rotating machinery and is communicating his continued existence through a foot movement alone. In one of the time travel sequences, Ernie and Peter are transported through different periods of history while fighting, which means that whatever physical laws govern Ernie's regeneration are not time-dependent. He is not immortal because of something happening in the present. He is apparently just built this way. The most emotionally complex fight comes in the episode where Peter discovers Ernie is dying of natural causes, not from their battles, but from some unnamed illness. Peter's reaction to this is surprising even by the show's standards. He doesn't celebrate. He panics. He performs increasingly frantic CPR and brings Ernie back. And in a moment that almost qualifies as the show being honest with itself about what this relationship actually is, Peter admits that he doesn't want to be responsible for the destruction caused by their battles, but also that he actually enjoys fighting Ernie. Not because he wins, not because the fights mean anything, but because they are, in some deeply strange way, one of the constants in his life. That admission changes the texture of every fight that came before it. Because if Peter needs these fights on some level, if they represent something that his ordinary suburban existence cannot provide, then the question becomes, what role does Ernie play in the emotional architecture of Peter Griffin's world? Is he a villain? Is he a friend? Is he the only entity in Peter's life that treats him as a genuine equal, capable of meeting Peter at his own physical and emotional extreme? The show never answers this. It moves on. The next episode, Peter's doing something else entirely, and Ernie has either recovered or been quietly filed away until the plot needs him again. But the question lingers in the air of 31 Spooner Street long after the furniture has been put back in place. There's also the matter of Ernie's wife, Nicole, who deserves more attention than she has ever received. She is aware of her husband's feud with Peter. She knows about it in enough detail to accompany him to their reconciliation dinner. She sits across the table from the man who has tried to kill her husband multiple times, and she is polite about it. She is, by every visible indication, a reasonable and functional person who is in a marriage with a man who regularly gets into apocalyptic physical confrontations with a human in Rhode Island. What is her experience of this? Does she worry when Ernie goes out? Does she lie awake at night listening for the sounds of a fight starting? Does she have emergency contacts she can reach in the aftermath? Does she know about Dr. Hartman? Does she know, if the lab theory is correct, that her husband was made rather than born? Does she know how he survived the propeller? We get no answers. Nicole appears at dinner, she says Ernie's name, and then she is never seen again in any significant way. She is the most underexplored character in a show full of underexplored characters, and the mysteries she carries with her are the ones that feel, somehow, the most genuinely human. The giant chicken is not a throwaway joke. It never was. It is a mystery that the show built so carefully that it disguised itself as absurdity. Every time Ernie opens one eye at the end of a fight, it is not a punchline. It is a promise. One day, we will find out what this is really about, and that day has not yet come. Section 3. The Gun in the Vault. Brian Griffin and the Life He Almost Did Not Live. Brian Edward Griffin is, depending on which season you are watching, either the most relatable character in the show or the most frustrating one, or sometimes, in the same episode, both simultaneously. He is a white Labrador retriever who walks on two legs, drives a 2004 Toyota Prius, drinks martinis, and has harbored feelings for his best friend's wife for more than 25 years without ever fully resolving them. He has a degree from Brown University that he did not finish earning. He has a novel that he has been writing for so long that the title has become a joke. He has a son named Dylan from a relationship he did not sustain, and a mother named Biscuit who gave him away when he was young so he could have a better life, and a father named Coco who died after being hit by a truck. What Brian Griffin does not have for most of the show's run is a satisfying explanation for what he actually is. This sounds like an odd thing to say about a character who has been on screen for over 2 decades, in hundreds of episodes, with more backstory fragments than almost any other character in the show. But the fragments do not add up to a coherent whole. They point in directions that the show never follows. They raise questions that the writing room apparently thought were either too complicated to address or not interesting enough to bother with. Let us start at the beginning. Brian was found wandering as a stray and taken in by Peter Griffin. This is the official story, told in the Season 1 episode, Brian, Portrait of a Dog. Peter found him wandering around and brought him home, and Brian became a member of the Griffin family, taking their name. Simple enough. Except that in the season 7 episode, The Man with Two Brians, Brian shows the family videos of himself as a young puppy, and in those videos, he is already in the Griffin home. He is already there as a puppy before the supposed adoption. Either the timeline is wrong, or the adoption story is wrong, or there are two explanations for Brian's presence in the house that the show has never reconciled with each other. Then there's the question of Brian's birth circumstances. His mother, Biscuit, gave him away from a puppy mill in Houston, Texas when he was young. She did this so he could have a better life. Brian apparently had a friend at the puppy mill named Shredder who has never forgiven him for leaving. This detail appears in season 18 and then evaporates without further exploration. Who is Shredder? What kind of life is Shredder living now? Does the existence of Shredder mean there are other dogs from Brian's original environment who ended up in very different circumstances? And what does Brian feel about that when he is sitting in his comfortable house drinking his comfortable martini? But the most significant mystery surrounding Brian Griffin is not biographical, it is existential, and it sits in a safety deposit box. In the season 8 episode Brian and Stewie, which is widely regarded as one of the best and most unusual episodes the show ever produced, Brian and Stewie become accidentally locked in a bank vault over a weekend. They cannot get out. They have nothing to do except talk. And what happens during those hours in the vault is the most nakedly honest the show has ever been about either of them. Brian reveals that he keeps a gun in a safety deposit box at that very bank. Not for self-defense. Not for any practical reason. He keeps it because there have been times when he has thought about ending his own life, and he keeps it in the vault at a distance as a way of making that act harder to commit impulsively. The safety deposit box is a buffer between his worst moments and his worst possible action. Stewie's reaction to this is not what you might expect. It is not panic. It is not immediate problem solving. It is something quieter and more devastating. He tells Brian that he is glad he exists, that Brian matters to him in a way that goes beyond the adventures and the jokes and the road trips and the banner, that Stewie's life is genuinely better because Brian is in it. And then the episode ends, and the next episode begins, and almost none of this is ever directly addressed again. The gun is referenced occasionally in later seasons, but the emotional weight of what Brian revealed is absorbed back into the general noise of the show. Brian continues to function. He continues to drink. He continues to fail at writing and succeed at being charming in ways that he does not deserve. He continues to be the character who says smart things in the living room and then does inexplicable things when no one is watching. But the gun is still in the vault. And the question of why Brian Griffin, a dog who by every external measure has a better life than most fictional characters in the history of animation, has needed that gun as a safeguard, is a question the show raises once and then soft pedals out of the room. Fan theorists have suggested that Brian's situation is more philosophically complicated than it appears. He is a dog. His lifespan is fundamentally shorter than the humans he lives among. In one episode, Peter taunts him about this directly, reminding him that he will likely die before Stewie reaches adolescence. Brian processes this awareness daily. He is surrounded by people who will outlive him by decades. He watches the Griffin children grow up in real time, while knowing that the span of a dog's years is, by human standards, criminally brief. That awareness, combined with the specific pain of being intelligent enough to understand your own limitations, and the failed ambitions that those limitations produce, is a weight that Brian carries in every episode, whether the episode acknowledges it or not. The novel he cannot finish, the writing career that produces embarrassments instead of masterpieces, the women who leave him, the friend who lives with and will outlive him, the son he is not raising. the mother who gave him away for his own good. There is also the theory, seeded through crossover details between Family Guy and American Dad, that Brian may be the product of CIA genetic experimentation. Stan Smith's world in American Dad contains talking animals created through classified research. The coincidence of Brian's almost entirely human consciousness in an animal body, without any in-universe explanation for how such a thing could come to be naturally, points towards something that was done to him rather than something that simply happened. If Brian was made in a lab, then his whole relationship with the Griffin family takes on a different quality. He was not randomly found and randomly adopted. He was deployed, whether consciously or not. Whether by an agency that wanted something, or by a well-meaning scientist who wanted to see what a human intelligence dog would do if placed in a loving family environment, the question of Brian's origin has been left permanently unresolved. And that unresolved status allows the show to use him as both a comedic foil and an emotional anchor, without ever having to commit to what he actually is. We know what he does. We know how he sounds, and what he drinks, and how he treats his friends when he is being his best self, and how he treats them when he is being the worst version of himself. We know the sound of his typing on a laptop at 3 a.m, the way he smells the air when a female human passes by, the particular combination of superiority and insecurity that makes him both likable and maddening in almost equal measure. But we do not know where he came from. Not really. And we do not know whether the gun is still in the vault, or whether at some point in an episode we were not watching, he took it out and held it for a while before putting it back. And we do not know what it means, that the most intelligent member of the Griffin family keeps that specific object at that specific distance as a kind of ongoing insurance policy against his own worst days. What we do know is that in the season 12 episode Life of Brian, a car hit him on Spooner Street and he died. The family grieved. Stewie's grief in particular was the kind of grief that does not announce itself with dramatic crying, but instead goes very quiet and very still and then begins working. Because Stewie eventually travels through time to prevent the car from ever reaching Brian, and brings him back, and says nothing about any of it afterward except by being slightly softer and slightly more careful in the weeks that follow. Brian's death was, at the time of its original broadcast, treated as permanent. It trended on every platform that was measuring trends that week. People who had not watched the show in years reacted to it. It felt, for a brief moment, like the show had done something genuinely irreversible. And then it was undone. Stewie fixed it. Brian came back. And the show moved on to the next thing. But the gun is still in the vault. Some mysteries do not get undone just because the person carrying them was allowed to live. Section 4. The question. Nobody asks the baby. Stewie Griffin and the riddle of the Big Bang. Let us take a moment to sit with what Stewie Griffin actually is. He is 1 year old. He has been 1 year old for over 25 years of broadcast television, which means that within the logic of the show's internal time, he has been 1 year old for however many months or years the show spans. And the answer to that question is genuinely unclear because the show's relationship with passing time has always been more impressionistic than literal. He speaks in a refined accent that is somewhere between received pronunciation British English and the cadence of a 1940s film villain. He has, at various points in the show's history, built a fully functional time machine, constructed a shrink ray, invented a mind control device, created a weather alteration apparatus, constructed a teleportation device, engineered a multi-dimensional portal, and developed what can only be described as a working return pad capable of navigating the fabric of space-time with sufficient precision to deposit its user at specific coordinates in both location and time. He has done all of this in his bedroom, in the upstairs portion of a house at 31 Spooner Street, using equipment that he presumably either constructed from raw materials or ordered online, since no family member has ever mentioned noticing large technical deliveries arriving at the house for an infant. He wanted, for the first 3 seasons of the show's original run, to kill his mother and take over the world. These were not abstract ambitions. He had specific plans. He made real attempts. He failed for reasons that were usually circumstantial rather than for lack of capability. And then something changed. The evil genius faded to the background. The world domination plots became less frequent, then rare, then occasional flourishes in episodes that were otherwise about something else. The attempts on Lois's life slowed to a trickle. Stewie became something softer, more emotional, more interested in his friendship with Brian than in his original purpose. But before that transition completed, the show did something with Stewie that is so cosmologically significant that it deserves its own quiet moment of appreciation. It revealed that Stewie Griffin caused the Big Bang. This happens in the Season 9 episode of The Big Bang Theory, and it happens through a chain of events that begins with Stewie wanting to make a better comeback joke against Brian and ends with the revelation that without Stewie, the universe would not exist. Here is the chain. Stewie and Brian end up fighting over the controls of Stewie's time machine and are accidentally transported outside of the space-time continuum. They are, in the most literal sense, in nowhere. There is no time where they are. There is no space. There are no physical laws. In order to return to reality, Stewie overloads his return pad, releasing a massive burst of energy. The explosion propels them back into the universe. Days later, Stewie analyzes the residual background radiation left by the Big Bang, the foundational cosmic event that created all matter and energy and space and time. He compares its energy signature to the signature produced by his return pad during the explosion that brought them back from outside space-time. They match. Exactly. The Big Bang was caused by Stewie's return pad, which means that the universe exists because Stewie Griffin built a machine and then accidentally used it in a way that created everything. He is not just a character in a story. According to the show's internal cosmology, he is the reason the story exists at all. He is the reason there is a story to exist in. He is the reason there is an everything. This is compounded by the episode's secondary revelation. Stewie's half-brother Bertram, a recurring antagonist who shares a biological father in Peter Griffin but has a different mother, travels back to the Renaissance period to kill Leonardo da Vinci, who is Stewie's ancestor from Lois's side of the family. Bertram's logic is that if he kills Stewie's ancestor, Stewie is never born, which means Stewie is never able to create the Big Bang, which means the universe never forms. Bertram is not just trying to kill Stewie, he is trying to prevent the existence of reality itself. Stewie defeats Bertram, and then, in one of the show's quietly remarkable logical maneuvers, realizes that with Da Vinci dead, there is no one to carry his genetic line forward. So Stewie injects his own DNA into Da Vinci's girlfriend, effectively becoming his own ancestor. He is in his own ancestral line. He is a biological prerequisite for his own existence. He was there in the Renaissance, making himself possible before he was born in the 20th century to a woman he spent years trying to murder. This is a closed causal loop of extraordinary complexity, and the show acknowledges it as such, but then moves on to other things without ever returning to explore what it means for Stewie's sense of self. Because what does it mean for a 1-year-old baby to know that he is the architect of all existence? What does it mean to carry that knowledge in a body that still requires diaper changes and cannot reach most of the household's light switches? What does it feel like to be simultaneously the most cosmologically significant entity in the history of the universe and also someone who gets put down for a nap? The early Stewie, the evil genius, had a coherent relationship with power. He wanted it, he pursued it. He built elaborate machines to attain it. His grandiosity was consistent with his capabilities. The later Stewie, the emotionally open adventurer, is more relatable but carries the Big Bang revelation like a coat he put on one day and never thought to take off, because nobody asks him about it. There is also the mystery of what Stewie actually is in a deeper sense than just evil genius baby. The show has floated the idea through various time travel episodes that there is something unusual about Stewie's intelligence that goes beyond extraordinary genetics or extraordinary nurturing. The Da Vinci revelation suggests that genius, the specific kind of transcendent creative and intellectual brilliance that a figure like Leonardo possessed, may be something that Stewie literally carries in his DNA, passed down through a lineage that he himself helped establish in the 15th century. If that is true, then Stewie's intelligence is not an accident. It is the inheritance of a bloodline he seeded himself. And the question of whether Stewie would have been who he is if he had not gone back in time becomes unanswerable. Because without going back in time, he would not have existed to go back in time. And without going back in time, he would not have the genetic inheritance that made him who he is, and the loop closes and the question dissolves into pure paradox. There is a moment in the later seasons where a future version of Stewie, a man called Stu, who is Stewie at 35 years old, appears and reveals that the brilliant, world-dominating destiny Stewie once envisioned for himself did not materialize. Future Stewie is a disappointment, a man who reads Parade magazine and has not conquered anything. He takes vacations through time rather than using time as a tool for power. The evil genius became, in his own words, ordinary. What happened in the decades between the 1-year-old building time machines and the 35-year-old reading a magazine? What event or series of events softened the razor edge of Stewie's ambition? Was it the friendship with Brian? Was it the loss of the maternal obsession when Lois became less of an obstacle and more of a person? Was it something that has not been shown yet? Some turning point in a stretch of Stewie's life that the show has never visited? We are not told. The future episodes are not labeled as canonical futures. They exist in the show's usual fog of maybe this happened, maybe it didn't. Stewie's timeline is as unresolved as everything else in the show, which is perhaps appropriate for a character whose relationship with time is professional rather than personal. What we are left with is a baby who created the universe, who traveled to the Renaissance to ensure his own birth, who keeps a time machine in his bedroom at 31 Spooner Street, who once wanted more than anything to be a tyrant and has instead become, over the course of the show's long and complicated history, something that might be described as happy, or at least content, or at least no longer spending every waking moment planning murder. Whether that is growth or loss depends entirely on what you value. The show clearly decided it was growth, but it left the Big Bang sitting there, unaddressed, like a note slipped under a door that nobody has picked up yet. Section 5. The Girl Who Should Have Been the Heart. Meg Griffin's Missing Story. Meg Griffin is 16 years old. She has been 16 years old for the entire duration of the show. She attends James Woods Regional High School, where she is, by most accounts, socially invisible in the way that can only be achieved by a teenager who is genuinely trying to be noticed and failing completely. She plays the French horn. She is a decent student. She has at various points in the show's history demonstrated genuine athletic ability, genuine compassion, genuine creativity, and genuine emotional resilience, of a kind that most of the other characters in this world could not summon on their best day. She is also the most abused character in the history of animated comedy, which is a designation so thoroughly documented in popular culture that it has become a kind of shorthand. "Shut up, Meg" is not just a line of dialogue. It is a cultural artifact. a phrase that spread from the show into real life with such velocity that the actress who voices Meg, Mila Kunis, has spoken about hearing it directed at her personally by strangers, who aim the fictional cruelty of a cartoon father at the real human woman whose voice gives that character life. But set aside the meta conversation about the treatment of the character and look instead at what the show has actually told us about Meg Griffin, and notice how many pieces do not fit together. Start with her father. There's a season 3 episode called Screwed the Pooch in which a character named Stan Thompson is mentioned as possibly being Meg's biological father. This reference is fleeting and has never been directly confirmed, but the show has returned to the possibility through implication more than once. In various episodes, Peter's cruelty toward Meg exceeds what even the show's logic can explain as simple negligence or stupidity. And the question of whether he knows she may not be his daughter and directs his resentment at her because of it is one that the show plants and then refuses to harvest. The character Stan Thompson never appears with any clarity or significance. He is a name dropped in a moment and then left behind. Meg's biological paternity has never been confirmed either way, and that ambiguity does something interesting to the show's treatment of her, because if the audience suspects that Peter might know, then his behavior looks not just like thoughtlessness, but like something colder and more purposeful. There's also the matter of Meg's actual capabilities, which the show reveals in fragments, that are almost always immediately undercut by returning her to victim status in the next scene. In the Season 8 episode Dial Meg for Murder, Meg goes to prison, and when she returns, she is terrifying. She has developed genuine combat skills. She physically dominates her family. She beats Peter in ways that should permanently alter the power dynamic of the household. She is, for one episode, the most dangerous person in the house. And then the episode ends, and Meg goes back to being the person everyone ignores and insults. The fighting skills vanish or are placed in storage. The prison experience, which should have changed her in fundamental ways, is processed and set aside. The show occasionally uses Meg as a repository for unexpected competence, revealing that she has a gift for playing the saxophone, that she is a natural athlete under the right conditions, that she is capable of extraordinary acts of self-sacrifice and loyalty. In the crossover episode where she meets Lisa Simpson, the two find genuine kinship in their shared experience of being overlooked in their respective households. Lisa tells Meg she matters. Meg believes it briefly before the show moves on. But the deepest mystery about Meg Griffin is not what she can do or who her father is. It is what she is actually feeling, behind the resentment and the desperate social reaching and the episodes where she lashes out and then retreats. Because Meg is the only character in the show who behaves consistently, like a person who is in genuine psychological pain, rather than a cartoon exaggeration of someone in pain. The joke was always that her suffering was funny because it was over the top. But over the course of the show's long history, the suffering has become specific enough, detailed enough, and consistent enough to read as something real rather than comic. In Seahorse Seashell Party, the Season 10 Hurricane episode, Meg finally says everything. She tells her family exactly who they are and what they have done to her. She speaks with clarity and precision and rage, and the speech lands, and the family falls apart without her, as the absorber of their collective dysfunction, and then Meg takes it all back. She accepts her role. She absorbs the abuse back into herself so the family can function. The show presents this as Meg being noble in a dark way. She understands her own position. She accepts it consciously and deliberately. But the question that the show never asks, and that sits in the silence after the episode ends, is what the long-term cost of that conscious self-sacrifice is. What does Meg know about herself by the time she reaches the age of 20 that she could not have known at 16. What has the decade of documented abuse done to a psychology that the show has confirmed, in its more honest moments, is actually intact and intelligent and genuinely feeling? We see flashes. In Dial Meg for Murder, she is dangerous. In Peter's Sister, she gets a genuine reconciliation with her father, rooted in the revelation of the cycle of abuse that produced his behavior, and she shows mercy that she absolutely did not have to show. In Barely Legal, she becomes obsessed with Brian in a way that reads less as comedy and more as the very specific desperation of someone who has been shown so little positive attention that any small kindness feels like a declaration of love. These episodes exist, but the show's refusal to let them accumulate, to let them stick, means that Meg's potential as a character has never been realized. She exists in a permanent state of almost interesting, almost developed, almost in certain rare episodes, the most human person in the room. The question the show leaves open is whether she knows this about herself, whether she understands in the quiet hours of her room at 31 Spooner Street that she is in a story that has decided she is the least important person in it, and what she plans to do about that in the episodes that have not been written yet. The answer, based on everything the show has revealed about her, is that she is tougher than anyone gives her credit for. She has survived things that would have destroyed softer people. She has been knocked down and stood up so many times that the standing up is no longer remarkable. It is just something she does, automatic as breathing. But the mystery remains. Who is Meg Griffin, the one who exists between the episodes? The one who sits in her room when the show is not looking? The one who has a father who may not be her father, and skills that nobody has bothered to develop, and a capacity for feeling that the show routinely buries under a joke and walks away from? We have not been shown that person. Not fully. The show has never had the patience. And so Meg Griffin remains the most unresolved character in a show full of unresolved characters, waiting in a room on the second floor of 31 Spooner Street for a story that might never arrive. Section 6. Glenn Quagmire and the life that happened before the jokes. Glenn Quagmire is, in theory, a simple joke. He is the neighbor with the comically exaggerated libido, the man whose entire personality is organized around a single pronounced character trait, the punchline to his own existence. He lives at 29 Spooner Street, works as an airline pilot, owns a house that has been shown to contain things that probably should not be in a house, and has been married and divorced a number of times that the show has stopped bothering to count accurately. He says giggity. That is his thing. That is what he does. And yet, there is a version of Glenn Quagmire that appears in fragments throughout the show's history, glimpsed in the spaces between the jokes, that suggests a character of genuine depth and genuine darkness, a man carrying a history that the show has never fully excavated. His father, we learn in the Season 8 episode Quagmire's Dad, is a retired Navy veteran named Dan Quagmire. Dan Quagmire, in that episode, reveals that he is a transgender woman, transitioning and presenting as Ida. This is handled with varying degrees of grace by different characters in the episode, but Quagmire's reaction is significant. He is not angry at his parent for transitioning. He is devastated at what he perceives as the loss of the father figure he had. He grieves. He asks Ida in a quiet moment whether his childhood memories are real, whether the man who taught him things was really there, or whether he was always somewhere else inside a body that belonged to Ida. This is a genuinely emotional scene in a show that does not always handle genuine emotion gracefully. And what it reveals about Quagmire is that his relationship with masculinity, with the performance of being a certain kind of man, is not as simple or as comfortable as the jokes suggest. He learned what it meant to be a man from someone who was, in the most fundamental sense, performing that definition themselves. What does that do to a boy growing up? What questions does it leave unanswered in the quiet of adolescence about who you are supposed to be and where that identity comes from? The show never answers this. It moves on to other things. But the shadow of that question falls over every giggity, over every absurd sexual escapade, over the entire performance of hypermasculinity that Quagmire puts on every single episode. If his conception of manhood came from someone who did not actually hold that identity, then the question of where Glenn Quagmire's sense of self actually originates is genuinely open. There is also the matter of his age. In the episode Quagmire and Meg, it is established that Quagmire was born in 1948. This would make him in his mid-70s during the later seasons of the show. He does not appear to be in his mid-70s. He is, by every physical indicator, a man in his 40s. He is a product of the show's general disregard for the aging of its characters, but the specific detail of the birth year is strange because it was mentioned so deliberately, and it raises the question of what Quagmire was doing for the 30 or 40 years of his life that the show has never shown us. He served in the Navy at some point. This is implied in various episodes. The Navy connection likely explains certain aspects of his skill set. The ability to handle himself in dangerous situations. The ease with which he navigates the world of his own worst impulses without ever appearing genuinely threatened by consequence. Military service in that era would have placed him in specific historical moments. What did Quagmire see? What did he do? What did the world teach him about himself before he settled on Spooner Street and became the punchline neighbor? There are also the darker elements of his character that the show acknowledges and then retreats from. The episode And Then There Were Fewer contains a moment where the mystery of what happened to a body is explicitly connected to Quagmire through a cutaway that the show treats as a dark joke, but that, if taken seriously, implies something genuinely disturbing about what Quagmire does when no one is watching. The body disappears. A cutaway suggests Quagmire took it. No explanation is offered. The show moves on. This is the pattern with Quagmire. The show gestures toward an abyss and then pulls back before you have time to look down into it. It shows you the shadow of what he might be if the jokes stopped, and then the jokes start again and the shadow retreats. There is one moment that breaks this pattern, and it is the speech he delivers to Brian in the Season 8 episode, Jerome is the New Black. In this scene, Quagmire tells Brian with real precision and real feeling exactly why he dislikes him. He calls Brian a phony. He calls him out for his failed writing career and his pretentious attitude. He calls him out for his treatment of women, for hitting on Lois in front of Peter, for abandoning his own son. Every point Quagmire makes is backed by observable events, but the speech also reveals something about Quagmire himself. He delivers it with a level of emotional clarity and rhetorical precision that the joke version of the character should not possess. He is not being funny in this moment. He is being honest, and the honesty suggests a man who has thought carefully about what makes a good person and what falls short of that standard, and who has opinions about this that run deeper than the giggity surface suggests. Is it possible that Quagmire, in his quieter moments, measures himself against the same standard he applies to Brian and finds himself wanting? Is the ferocity of his critique of Brian partly a ferocity he was saving for himself, but redirected outward? The show does not say. It gives us the speech, and then it moves on. But the speech exists, and it sounds like something that came from a real place, and that real place has never been fully mapped. The genuine, unresolved mystery of Glenn Quagmire is not what he has done, though what he has done is extensive. It is what he wants. Not sexually, not professionally. What does he want from his life? Does he want what Peter has? A family, a permanence, a place where someone is always glad to see him come through the door? Does his parade of relationships represent an inability to settle for less than something specific? Or an inability to accept that what he actually wants is not available to him? He has been married, briefly and in various circumstances, to women who represent very different things. His relationships end. They always end. He returns to Spooner Street and the drunken clam and the bachelor existence that he has organized with such apparent satisfaction. But we have seen in enough unguarded moments that the satisfaction is not quite what it looks like from outside. There is something Glenn Quagmire is waiting for, or grieving the loss of, or has never quite been able to name. And the show, which gave him his birth year and his father and his speech about Brian and the shadow of what he is when the jokes go quiet, has never told us what that thing is. Section 7. The Deaths That Did Not Stay Dead. Family Guy's broken contract with mortality. Death is a recurring character in Family Guy. Not metaphorically, literally. Death appears in the form of the Grim Reaper as early as the Season 1 episode Death is a Bitch, where he breaks his ankle at the Griffin house, is nursed back to health by Peter, and eventually agrees not to kill Peter for a period of time in exchange for the kindness shown to him. He is voiced with a distinctive, weary quality that suggests a being who has been doing his job for longer than any reasonable entity should have to do any job, and who has developed a complicated set of feelings about the work as a result. Death comes back. He appears in multiple episodes across multiple seasons. He has a social life, he has opinions about things. He is, in the world of Family Guy, a consistent and somewhat sympathetic presence rather than a threatening one, which creates an interesting set of circumstances around the show's actual handling of permanent death. Because in a universe where death is a recurring character who can be persuaded to delay his duties, the question of what counts as final becomes genuinely complicated. Let us make a list of significant deaths in the show and examine what happened to them. Diane Simmons, the news anchor and Tom Tucker's co-anchor, is killed by a gunshot in the Season 9 premiere, and then there were fewer. She is shot from an upstairs window as she is about to execute Lois. The episode confirmed by Seth MacFarlane as canon, the characters who die in it, permanently gone. Diane Simmons does not come back. She stays dead. She is one of the few characters in the show's history who receives the dignity of a permanent ending. James Woods, the recurring antagonist who appeared as a fictionalized version of the actual actor James Woods, is also killed in the same episode, stabbed during a power outage by Diane. He had been a fixture of the show, a villain with a particular gift for chaos, and his death in that episode is similarly treated as permanent. Muriel Goldman, Mort Goldman's wife, is killed in that same episode as well. She stays dead. Mort is widowed and remains widowed. The Goldman family is permanently altered. These deaths hold. They are part of the category of events that the show treats as real. And then there is Brian Griffin. In the Season 12 episode Life of Brian, Brian is hit by a car on the street outside the Griffin house and dies. The death is handled with genuine emotional weight. The family grieves. The Griffin household buys a new dog, a charming Italian greyhound named Vinny, who is voiced by Tony Sirico of The Sopranos, and who fits into the family with a surprising grace that suggests the show was genuinely considering making the transition permanent. Stewie destroys his time machine in this episode as well, in a moment that feels like the show closing a door it has been relying on for too long. Without the time machine, Stewie cannot go back and fix things. Without the ability to fix things, Brian is gone. The show was committed, at least publicly, to the permanence of this. 2 episodes later, Stewie finds a way. He encounters his past self at a specific point in the future, borrows a return pad that has not yet been destroyed, and travels back to the moment just before Brian is hit by the car. He pushes Brian out of the path of the vehicle. Brian lives. Everything resets. The response from fans and critics was largely one of irritation, not because they did not want Brian back, but because the death had been used to generate enormous emotional investment and then immediately cashed out for a return to the status quo. The death was a stunt. The return confirmed what the death had seemed to deny, which is that in Family Guy, nothing is actually permanent, unless the show decides it is, and the show's decisions are not always made for narrative reasons. But here's the mystery that the death and return created. The episode Life of Brian contains details about the timeline that are not fully resolved. Stewie's time machine is destroyed in this episode. He cannot rebuild it quickly. He spends the 2-episode gap between Brian's death and his rescue existing in a reality where Brian is permanently gone, and the emotional toll of that period is visible in his behavior throughout. He accepts Vinny. He tries to move on. He does not succeed. Then he finds the return pad. But here's the question. The return pad he uses belongs to his past self, who is traveling to a future date and has not yet destroyed his machine. When Stewie borrows this pad, he creates a branch in the timeline. There's now a version of events where past Stewie traveled to the future, encountered present Stewie, loaned him the return pad, and then returned to his own time without a return pad, which should have made it impossible for him to go back at all. The mechanics of this are not addressed. The show does not explain how past Stewie got home after lending the pad. It simply resolves into the present where Brian is alive and everyone is grateful, and the inconsistency is filed in the same drawer as all the other inconsistencies. The broader mystery here is what the return actually means. Brian is alive, but he was dead, and Stewie changed history to prevent the death. But the original death happened in a timeline that still, technically, existed. There is a version of the story where Brian died on Spooner Street, and Vinny became the family dog, and the Griffins slowly reorganized themselves around his absence. That version of events still occurred. It was replaced rather than erased in the logic of time travel that the show usually employs. So Brian Griffin exists in 2 states simultaneously. He is alive in the timeline we follow, and he is dead in a timeline that was abandoned. Whether that matters to him personally is a question the show is not equipped to ask, because asking it would require a level of philosophical engagement with the implications of time travel that would probably slow down the cutaway gag budgeting process. What it means for the audience is this. Every time you watch Brian Griffin doing something funny or something infuriating or something quietly touching, you are also watching a person who died, who was eulogized, whose absence was processed and accepted by the people who loved him. Brian Griffin has experienced his own death from the outside through the grief of the people who remained, and he does not know it because the timeline that contained that death was replaced by one in which it never happened. That is a strange thing to be, and it is one more unresolved thread in the long and complicated life of a talking white dog who keeps a gun in a safety deposit box. There are other deaths worth noting. Peter Griffin has technically died several times in alternate timelines as in simulation sequences. Lois has died and been revealed to be alive in the Stewie Kills Lois 2-parter, which was then revealed to be a simulation. Chris and Meg and Stewie have died in various hypothetical futures. The show's relationship with mortality is consistently one of strategic deployment rather than genuine reckoning. Deaths happen when they are useful. Returns happen when they are convenient. The only deaths that stick are the ones involving characters the show has decided it no longer needs. And Death himself, the Grim Reaper, keeps showing up at the Drunken Clam, apparently not bothered by any of it. Section 8, The Monkey in the Closet, The Old Man Down the Street, The Neighborhood's Deepest Secrets. Chris Griffin's bedroom closet contains a monkey. This is established in the season 2 episode Damn It, Janet, which is the first time the closet door swings open at an unexpected moment to reveal a monkey standing in the shadows, pointing at Chris with a trembling arm and wearing what appears to be a look of concentrated malevolence. The closet closes. The episode continues. Chris is terrified. Nobody else believes him. This is the evil monkey, as the show calls him, and he is one of the most genuinely strange recurring elements in the show's history, because he exists for years, across dozens of episodes, as something the family dismisses as Chris's delusion, even though multiple characters have encounters with him that confirm his presence. The monkey smokes marijuana on Chris's bed when the family goes out. He becomes a Jehovah's Witness at one point. He is defeated in a confrontation with Brian's son Dylan Flanagan, who beats him up and allows Chris to access his closet for the first time and discover a very large quantity of, the show specifies, feces. The resolution of the evil monkey story comes in the season 8 episode Hannah Banana, when Chris manages to capture the monkey and bring him before the family. In this confrontation, the monkey's entire history is revealed. His pointing gesture, which Chris always interpreted as threatening, is simply how he initiates conversations with people. His shaking arm is the result of a copper deficiency, not malice. And the reason he is living in Chris's closet is this. He caught his wife in bed with another monkey. The betrayal broke him. He lost his job. He lost his house. He ended up in the closet of a child he never meant to frighten, and he has been there ever since because he had nowhere else to go. This is a genuinely moving backstory for what began as a background joke. The evil monkey was not evil. He was heartbroken. He was a creature who had been knocked down by life and crawled into the nearest dark space he could find and stayed there because the world outside the closet had already shown him what it was capable of doing to a person. But the resolution of the evil monkey story raises its own questions. The monkey had a wife, he had a job. He wore clothes that suggested professional employment. He had, at some point in his life before the closet, a social position that meant something to him. Where did he come from? How long was he living in the closet before Chris noticed him? And the most pressing question, where exactly does a monkey live in a Rhode Island suburb prior to marital breakdown? The show never addresses the monkey's origins with the same care it addressed his emotional backstory. He is, like Ernie, an anthropomorphic animal living in Quahog without any explanation for how he got there. He is, unlike Ernie, not violent and not regenerating. He is just a sad monkey in a child's closet, pointing at people because he wants to say hello. He eventually moves out after reconciling with Chris, who has become something like the father figure the monkey needed. The monkey goes to live in Jake Tucker's closet, presumably to perform the same emotional function for Jake that he performed for Chris, without the complication of being mistaken for a threat. This is almost sweet. Almost. The proximity to Herbert is a different kind of unsolved question. Herbert, the elderly man at 35 Spooner Street, has been a fixture of the neighborhood since season 3, and his specific orientation toward Chris Griffin has been the source of jokes that the show deploys with a regularity that sometimes tips from dark comedy into something that does not sit easily. But pull back from the jokes and look at what the show has actually built around Herbert. He is a World War II veteran. He has a crippled dog named Jesse who is his companion and who he genuinely seems to love. He is, according to the season 4 episode The Courtship of Stewie's Father, the eldest member of the Skull and Bones Secret Society, which is a detail that is mentioned once and never followed up on. He sings Somewhere That's Green from Little Shop of Horrors in a quiet moment, and his interpretation of the song, through the character he has been built to be, becomes a meditation on loneliness and the particular desperation of a man who is aware that his time is short and who sees in Chris something he cannot have and perhaps should not want. Herbert has also demonstrated, in the episode Peter's Daughter and elsewhere, genuine heroic capability. He saves Chris from an evil tree in the backyard of the Griffin house during the Petergeist episode. He fights a former Nazi named Franz Gutentag with conviction and honor, waking the man up from an advantage position rather than attacking him while he sleeps. Because Herbert has standards even within the complicated moral landscape of his existence. He is Roman Catholic. He attends the same church as the Griffins. He has a social world, however limited, that extends beyond his obsession with the neighborhood's children. What is Herbert's war story? What did he see during his service that shaped the man he became? What was his life in the decades between returning from the war and settling on Spooner Street? Did he have relationships? Did he have a family of his own at some point that ended badly? The show has never visited these questions, and by not visiting them, it has left Herbert as a character who is simultaneously a joke and a genuine source of sadness. The skull and bones detail is particularly frustrating because of what it implies about the social architecture of the show's world. If Herbert is a senior member of one of the most prominent and secretive establishments in American institutional history, then his presence on Spooner Street is not random. He chose to be here. He chose this neighborhood and this street and this particular proximity to a particular family. Whether that choice is innocent or deliberate has never been examined. And then there's the question of his dog, Jesse. Jesse is old and arthritic and cannot use his rear legs. Jesse and Herbert are, in their limitations, perfectly matched. Two elderly creatures navigating a world that was built for younger, faster, more capable versions of people and animals. Their relationship has a tenderness to it that the show deploys occasionally, almost accidentally. And that sits oddly against the dark jokes that Herbert's character is more usually associated with. Herbert will die before Chris finishes high school, by actuarial standards if nothing else. The show has never addressed what that end will look like. Whether Herbert has anyone beside Jesse who will notice his absence. Whether the Skull and Bones membership comes with something like a funeral arrangement. Whether Chris, who Herbert has spent years orbiting, will feel anything at the old man's passing that goes beyond relief. Spooner Street is full of people with histories the show cannot contain. The neighborhood is richer than any single episode suggests, stranger than its surface appearance, and more densely populated with mysteries than a street of that length in a city that size has any right to be. Section 9. The Time That Keeps Breaking. Paradoxes, alternate versions, and the show that cannot stay still. Family Guy exists in multiple timelines simultaneously. This is not a theory. This is a structural description of what the show has actually depicted over the course of its run. There's the main timeline, the one we follow episode to episode, where the Griffin family lives at 31 Spooner Street, and the rules are whatever the current episode requires them to be. There is the timeline where Brian died, and Vinny lived with the family for 2 episodes before Stewie undid everything. There is the timeline explored in Back to the Pilot, where Stewie and Brian travel back to the first episode ever aired and encounter their own past selves, resulting in a situation where multiple versions of both characters exist simultaneously, and the consequences of their visit ripple forward through time in ways that the show acknowledges are unresolvable. There's the timeline of Meet the Quagmires, where Peter travels back to the 1980s and makes choices that result in a future where he is married to Molly Ringwald and Quagmire has settled down with Lois. This future is eventually corrected, but the correction itself involves changes that had downstream effects, including the accidental punch that hit Ernie the giant chicken at a dance, and may have set the entire feud in motion from a different direction. There is the timeline glimpsed in Road to Germany, where Mort Goldman accidentally ends up in 1940s Europe and Stewie and Brian have to navigate the Holocaust to retrieve him. This episode happens within the main continuity. Its events are real, which means that Stewie Griffin walked through Nazi Germany, lived through it, and then came home to his crib at 31 Spooner Street, and none of that appears to have altered him in ways that subsequent episodes address. There is the timeline of Road to the Multiverse, where Stewie and Brian travel through alternate versions of reality in order to return to their own. These alternate realities include a version where Christianity never existed, and the world is technologically thousands of years more advanced, a version where humans never evolved, and dogs are the dominant species, and Brian lives as a pet in the care of a dog family while a human Stewie is the family animal, and a version drawn entirely in the style of a Disney animated film where everything is beautiful and then immediately horrifying. Each of these alternate realities raises the question of what determines which version of the world is the correct one to return to. Stewie and Brian always navigate back to the world we know, the world of 31 Spooner Street and the Drunken Clam and the ongoing saga of the Griffin family. But the alternatives exist. They are real places within the show's cosmology. They are populated by versions of these characters who are living out their own unwitnessed lives in directions the show has never followed. There is a particularly haunting moment in Road to the Multiverse where Brian and Stewie encounter a version of themselves from an alternate reality who have also been traveling through dimensions and are significantly more experienced and significantly more damaged by what they have seen. These alternate versions have been doing what Brian and Stewie are doing for what appears to be a much longer time, and the effect on them is visible. They are tired in a way that the main versions are not. They have seen things. They have made choices in those alternate realities that the show does not show us. What choices? What did they do in those worlds? What do you do when you can move between versions of reality and the version you come from is just one possibility among infinite possibilities? Do you stay? Do you try to fix things in other worlds? Do you find a version where the people you love are happier and consider staying there? Do you eventually lose the ability to remember which version of yourself is the original? The show does not ask these questions. It uses the multiverse as a vehicle for jokes about the Disney aesthetic and jokes about dogs having human jobs. And those jokes are funny. But the existential weight of the premise sits underneath them like a floor that the episode walks across without acknowledging. The time travel paradoxes in Family Guy have accumulated to the point where the show's internal logic is genuinely impossible to resolve. Stewie has altered history at least a dozen times across multiple episodes. Each alteration should have consequence. Some of those consequences are shown, most are not. The version of reality that we arrive at in any given episode is not clearly traceable through the chain of previous alterations, and the show does not attempt to trace it because doing so would make the show impossible to write week by week. But the paradoxes exist, and the most significant of all of them is the one we have already discussed, which is that Stewie Griffin is his own ancestor. He injected his DNA into a Renaissance woman to ensure his own birth. He is in his own genetic line. He will live his entire life carrying DNA that he himself provided to a woman who lived 500 years before his parents were born. And the loop that creates is so complete and so strange that it cannot be resolved or escaped, only acknowledged and set aside. There is also the question of what happens to all the versions of Stewie and Brian who travel through time and then fail to properly restore the timeline before returning. In Yug Illimath, Brian uses the time machine to impress women and accidentally reverses the flow of time, causing events to run backward. This includes the reversal of Stewie's birth, undoing it in reverse before Stewie catches up to the problem and corrects it. Which means that in the internal logic of this episode, Stewie's existence was briefly in the process of being unmade and then remade. And the version of Stewie who exists after the correction is technically the product of a second instantiation of his birth, rather than the original one. Is he the same Stewie? The show says yes. The logic of the show's cosmology says maybe. The philosophical question of identity and continuity that this raises is one that Family Guy has spent 25 years dancing around without ever committing to an answer. The reason this matters, if you are someone who cares about these things at 3 in the morning when a YouTube video about unsolved Family Guy mysteries is the most appealing thing in your world, is that it suggests that the world of the Griffins is fundamentally unstable, that the reality we watch each episode is one of many possible realities, that the characters we care about are in some sense arbitrary, that the versions of Peter and Lois and Brian and Stewie and Meg and Chris who happen to be in our continuity are not the versions who were most protected or most fortunate or most essential, but simply the versions who ended up here through a series of branching choices and time travel interventions and multiverse adjacencies that nobody is fully keeping track of. This could be depressing. It could also be, in the quietest possible way, comforting. Because if there are infinite versions of the Griffin family scattered across infinite timelines, then somewhere in that infinity, there is a version where Meg gets the story she deserves, where Brian finishes his novel and it is good, where Stewie finds out what he is capable of when he is not also trying to be the cause of the universe, where Peter learns something and it sticks. Those versions exist in the logic the show has established. They are real. We just cannot see them from here. Section 10. Peter Griffin and the life he should not be able to sustain. Peter Lovenbroy Griffin. Born Justin Peter Griffin. Born in Mexico, technically. During a border run his mother made in a failed attempt at an abortion that Peter has been informed about and has processed with his characteristic combination of complete misunderstanding and absolute unfazed continuation of existence. He is Irish-American by heritage, with African ancestry through a great-great-great-great-grandfather named Nate, who was enslaved by Lois's ancestral family. A connection that makes the Griffin marriage not just a story of class difference, but of historical entanglement running deeper than anything either of them typically acknowledges. He was raised by Francis and Thelma Griffin, though Francis, it turns out, was not his biological father. His biological father is an Irishman named Mickey McFinnigan, whom Peter discovers in the season 5 episode Peter's Two Dads, and with whom he establishes a relationship only after defeating him in what both men agree to call the game of drink, which involves matching shots until one of them passes out. Peter wins. Mickey, in his defeat, accepts Peter as his son. This revelation that Francis Griffin was not Peter's father changes the mathematics of his childhood in ways the show does not fully explore. Francis Griffin was by most accounts a difficult man, religiously rigid, often cold, sometimes cruel in the particular way of men who believe that cruelty is a form of strength training. Peter spent his entire childhood believing he was the son of this man, internalizing whatever it means to be the genetic product of someone like that, and then found out in middle age that the connection was not genetic at all. What does that do to a person? What does it mean that the man Peter thought he came from was not actually his origin? Does it explain some of the instability in Peter's personality, the childishness that the show presents as his central trait, but that looks, in certain lights, like a developmental history that was never quite resolved? Does it explain his relationship with his children, the way he treats them as optional rather than necessary, the way he can forget he has a daughter for entire episodes, and then feel terrible about it, and then forget again? The show does not answer these questions. It gives us the revelation of Mickey McFinnigan, and then mostly returns Peter to his default state, occasionally referencing the Irish heritage in ways that are meant to be jokes, but that carry the weight of something the show has not fully processed. Then there's the question of Peter's intelligence. This is a show that has repeatedly established and then deliberately ignored evidence that Peter Griffin is more capable than his standard presentation suggests. In the Season 3 episode, Stuck Together, Torn Apart, a flashback shows Peter as a college student at Providence College, engaged in a philosophy seminar, arguing coherently and with genuine intellectual engagement about the nature of identity and consciousness. He is not the Peter we usually watch. He is present, thoughtful, and capable of sustained abstract reasoning. In Paterdated, Peter takes an intelligence test and receives a result that legally classifies him as mentally challenged. The episode uses this result to explore how Peter is treated when people believe he has a cognitive disability. But the result itself is curious because the intelligence test in question is described as a nonverbal IQ assessment. And there's a body of research suggesting that verbal intelligence and nonverbal spatial reasoning are genuinely distinct. Peter's score on one metric does not necessarily tell us anything about the other. There are episodes throughout the show's history where Peter demonstrates specific competencies that should not coexist with the level of general incompetence the show treats as his baseline. He is an adequate driver. He has held multiple jobs, not always successfully, but held them. He successfully navigated the purchase of a house and has sustained a mortgage for over 20 years in a real estate market that has been described as genuinely competitive. He raised 3 children to adolescence without any of them dying, which in the context of the show's universe is actually a relatively significant achievement. The mystery of Peter's intelligence is related to the mystery of Peter's happiness. He is, for most of the show's history, presented as fundamentally satisfied with his life. He has friends. He has a wife who loves him, at least periodically and with significant reservations. He has children who, under the right circumstances, love him back. He has the drunken clam. He has Pawtucket Patriot Ale. He has his television and his couch and his recurring fantasies about things he wishes he had done differently, and his periodic discoveries that he is, in some narrow and specific way, good at something. The question the show has never asked about Peter Griffin is not whether he is stupid or smart or good or bad. The question is whether he knows what he has. Whether somewhere inside the loud, careless, selfish exterior there is a man who understands, in moments he does not share, that the life on Spooner Street, chaotic and sometimes cruel and often absurd as it is the thing he was built for. That for all his fantasies about being other people and doing other things, the drunken clam and the worn couch, and the woman downstairs who has chosen him again and again, despite having every reason not to, are what he would choose if he were given a true choice. The show has gestured at this in episodes where Peter's cruelty is interrupted by genuine tenderness. There are episodes where he holds Lois like he means it. Episodes where he looks at his children with something that is not a joke, not a setup, but actual love in the form that love takes in ordinary lives. These moments are rare. The show usually moves away from them quickly, as if embarrassed by them, as if warmth is less comfortable than chaos. But they exist. And they raise the question of whether the Peter Griffin we watch every episode is the complete version of Peter Griffin, or whether there's a version of him that we only see in corners and pauses and the occasional unguarded moment. A version that is smaller and quieter and more aware than the one who crashes through walls and fights giant chickens and forgets he has a daughter named Meg. That Peter, the smaller, quieter one, has never been the subject of an episode. He may never be. But the evidence of his existence accumulates in the margins of the show, one almost tender moment at a time, until the picture of who Peter Griffin actually is begins to look more complicated than the character description suggests. Section 11. Lois Griffin's Other Life. The woman behind the piano. She plays piano beautifully. This is not a quirk or a character detail, it is a genuine skill that the show introduces in the early episodes and then quietly retains across the entire run. Lois Griffin was classically trained. She has a gift. And she lives in a house on Spooner Street where nobody really asks about it. She was born Lois Pewterschmidt. Her parents are Carter Pewterschmidt, a multi-billionaire industrialist who has hidden a cure for cancer from the public for financial reasons, who has given an entire town cancer through the chemical waste from his company, and whose relationship with his daughter has been marked by the particular cold neglect of a wealthy man who could not be bothered to be present. Her mother, Barbara Pewterschmidt, is a Holocaust survivor who concealed her Jewish heritage for decades, allowing Lois to be raised Protestant while carrying an ancestral history that was never shared with her. Lois has a sister, Carol, who has been married many times and who exists mostly at the edges of the show's attention. She has a brother, Patrick, who was locked in a mental asylum for 30 years because he walked in on their mother performing a sex act on the comedian Jackie Gleason when he was a child, and suffered a breakdown and concluded from that breakdown that fat people were evil and began strangling them. Carter Pewterschmidt kept Patrick's existence secret from Lois for 3 decades. When she finally learns about him and releases him, he becomes a serial killer. He nearly kills her husband. This is Lois's family of origin. This is the environment that produced her. A father who hides cancer cures and gives towns cancer and neglects his children. A mother who survived genocide and then concealed that survival from her children. A brother who spent 30 years in an asylum because of something he saw as a child that nobody protected him from. And Lois turns out to be mostly fine. She has her episodes, certainly. There's the drug addiction that she develops and overcomes. There's the boxing career that surfaces briefly and then disappears. There is the pornographic film she made in college, which comes back to haunt her decades later when a local journalist airs it as a news segment. There is the fact that she is, according to the show's internal record, a black belt in taijutsu, a level of physical capability that the show invokes when useful and forgets when inconvenient. There is also the revelation, played for comedy in the season 11 episode, a bottle episode, that Lois has a psychotic streak. She describes herself in that episode with a smile that does not belong on someone making a casual observation, as a secret little psycho with very little to lose. The show frames this as a joke and then continues, but the description lingers. What is Lois actually carrying? Beyond the functional competence and the occasional chaos and the patience that repeatedly exceeds what any reasonable person could be expected to sustain, what is the texture of Lois Griffin's inner life? What does she think about at night when Peter is asleep and the house is quiet and she has a moment that is genuinely hers? Does she think about her brother? She visits him once a month. The show establishes this offhandedly. She goes to see Patrick in the asylum on a regular basis, which means she maintains a relationship with the family member nobody else wanted to acknowledge. The one her father erased, the one her mother apparently chose not to remember. Lois is the person in the Pewterschmidt family doing the maintenance work of keeping Patrick's existence real. Does she think about the cure for cancer? She knows it exists. The show reveals that Carter has developed and hidden Specimen Z, a genuine cure, and that he has used it on himself while concealing it from the world. Lois knows this. She knows that her father has access to something that could save the lives of millions of people and has chosen profit over those lives. She continues to have a relationship with him. She continues to show up at Thanksgiving and Christmas and the various family events that the show uses Carter as a presence in. What is the internal negotiation that allows her to do that? The mystery of Lois Griffin is not whether she is competent or capable or loving. The show has established all of those things across hundreds of episodes. The mystery is what the cost of sustaining all of that has been. What has she given up? What did she leave behind at Kent State and Salve Regina University? And whatever version of her pre-Peter life the show glimpses in its rare flashback episodes? What did she have in that life that she does not have now, and does she miss it, and has she made peace with missing it? The piano is a clue. She sits at the piano and she plays. She sits at... In the early seasons, this is presented as a simple character detail. In the later seasons, when the warmth of the Griffin household has been systematically stripped out by the writing choices the transcript we worked with earlier documented so carefully, the piano is one of the few things that the show consistently associates with the version of Lois who exists before the chaos reaches her. Before Peter does something that requires her management. Before one of the children needs something that requires her intervention. Before the household requires a particular combination of patience and competence and resignation that running the Griffin family apparently demands on a daily basis. She plays the piano, and in those moments she is not a wife or a mother or a neighbor or a character in a situation comedy. She is someone who has a gift and who is using it and who is briefly unreachable. What song is she playing when the show cuts away? The show does not always specify, but the question of what Lois Griffin chooses to play when nobody is asking her to play anything, when the choice is entirely hers, feels like a question that has an answer that would tell us something about who she is under the management, and the chaos and the occasional psychotic streak, and the lifelong negotiation with a family that produced both a billionaire who hides cancer cures and a serial killer who spent 30 years forgetting how to be a person. She went to college. She had a life before 31 Spooner Street that the show has sketched in the broadest possible strokes. She made a film in college that she regrets. She had a relationship with a man named Jerome that Peter eventually befriends, which means that one of the men she was intimate with before her marriage became a regular fixture in her husband's social world. A situation that the show treats as a source of mild awkwardness, rather than as the genuinely strange dynamic it represents. She chose Peter. She chose, at some point, to marry a man her family did not approve of, a man without her money or her education or her background, a man who has given her more cause to reconsider that choice than can easily be counted. And she has renewed that choice in every episode that does not directly address the question. By being present, by being his wife, by playing piano in the living room while the house moves around her. What is the mystery of Lois Griffin? It is the mystery of the choice she made and has continued to make. Why Peter? Not because the show has not tried to answer this question, but because the answers it has given are always insufficient. She loves him. She chose him. The early seasons showed us why, in the way that early seasons of any show do, by demonstrating the genuine current of warmth between them. But the later seasons stripped most of that warmth away, and what is left is Lois maintaining her choice in a house that has become harder to choose. The mystery is not whether she loves him. It is what kind of love this is at this point in the story. What love looks like after 25 years of this specific man in this specific house on this specific street. Whether the piano is her piece or her answer or her question, playing itself out in the empty spaces of an evening when everything else is quiet. Section 12. The town remembers. Quahog's strangest unrepeatable incidents. Quahog has died multiple times. In the Season 2 episode, Da Boom, a nuclear war at midnight on New Year's 1999 destroys most of civilization. The Griffins survive. They travel to Quahog's ground zero with a small group of survivors. A giant mutant rat threatens them. Ernie the giant chicken was established as having given Peter a coupon that day. The world was effectively ended, and then, through the show's general disregard for continuity, was simply not ended in the following episode. Da Boom is treated by most viewers as a non-canonical episode, an alternate timeline that the show visited and then stepped back from. But the details in it are specific enough to suggest something more than a one-off. The coupon backstory is confirmed here. Specific character details that would continue into later seasons are present. And the nuclear apocalypse, which by all rights should have restructured the world of the show permanently, simply failed to restructure it, which raises the question of whether there is a mechanism in the show's universe for recovering from civilizational collapse, or whether Da Boom exists in a parallel track that the main continuity quietly runs alongside without touching. Quahog was also destroyed partially by a comet in a Season 6 episode and threatened by numerous other apocalyptic events across the show's history. The town has a remarkable recovery rate. Buildings that are demolished in one episode are present and undamaged in the next. Streets that are shown to have been leveled during fight sequences between Peter and the giant chicken are back to full functionality within the same episode. The town repairs itself at a rate that should not be physically possible. There is the mystery of the drunken clam. The bar has been present in every season, serving as the social anchor for Peter and his friends, and it has been established to be owned and operated by a barman named Horace for most of the show's run. In later seasons, the ownership and management have shifted in ways that the show has not always tracked carefully. But what the drunken clam represents in the show's geography is more interesting than who owns it at any given moment. The drunken clam is a place where the rules of the show are slightly different. Conversations that would not happen in the Griffin house or on Spooner Street happen at the clam. Friendships are conducted with a slightly different quality at the bar. Peter and Quagmire and Joe and Cleveland, when Cleveland is present, are more honest with each other in that space than they typically are anywhere else. The drunken clam is where the show's men go to be, with varying degrees of success, something other than the exaggerated versions of themselves that the rest of the show requires. And then there's the matter of James Woods High School, which is named after the actual actor, James Woods, because a recurring bit in the show involves the actual James Woods having had a complex relationship with the city of Quahog, having wronged multiple residents and been opposed, and eventually killed before being somewhat honored by having the local high school bear his name. This is one of the stranger celebrity interactions in the show's history. A situation in which a real person was repeatedly depicted doing fictional things in a fictional city until the fictional city killed him and named a school after him. The high school is where Meg and Chris attend classes. It is where a significant portion of the show's younger generation plotlines unfold. It is a building with its own culture, its own social hierarchies, its own population of recurring background characters, and occasional speaking parts. It is a school named after a man who, within the show's cosmology, is dead. Whether the current students of James Woods Regional High School know this, or whether they know the specific story of how the school came to be named after him, is something the show has never addressed. There is also the mystery of Quahog's founding. In the Season 6 episode Peter's Progress, the show depicts a historical Peter figure named Griffin Peterson as one of the town's original settlers, establishing that the Griffin family connection to this specific location goes back to the very beginning of the place's existence as a settlement. Griffin Peterson was exiled to America and founded the town after marrying a woman named Lady Redbush. Quahog, according to this episode, was founded by an ancestor of Peter Griffin. If that is true and the show presents it as a form of fact through the historical episode, then the Griffin family's residence at 31 Spooner Street is not a coincidence. It is a homecoming. Peter lives in a town his ancestor built. The street he lives on and the neighborhood he navigates and the bar he drinks at and the brewery he works at all exist because of someone who carries his face and his name and his particular combination of ambition and incompetence. What does it mean to be the descendant of a town's founder and to be treated by that town as nobody? What does it mean that Quahog has essentially forgotten its own origins? That Peter Griffin moves through a landscape that his genetic line made possible without any acknowledgement from the landscape itself? The show brushes past this. It uses the founding story as a vehicle for jokes about colonial-era manners and anachronistic dialogue, and the show's usual interest in the absurdities of history. But the detail is real within the show's continuity. Peter Griffin belongs to Quahog in a way that the town has entirely failed to recognize. And then there's the ongoing mystery of what Quahog actually is. It sits in Rhode Island, modeled after Cranston, but it contains things that no actual Rhode Island city contains. It has had celebrities of almost every kind pass through it. It has been the site of alien contacts, supernatural events, time travel incursions, nuclear near misses, zombie outbreaks, and an extended period of time in which Death himself was performing domestic chores in a local residence. It has a news station staffed by characters who age and change and sometimes die and are replaced, and a police force that contains one of Peter's closest friends, and a hospital staffed by a doctor of genuinely uncertain competence. Quahog is a small city with the incident rate of a war zone. Its residents endure things that would break most people and then go back to the grocery store the next day and argue about parking. Its buildings regenerate. Its population absorbs catastrophe and continues. Its social fabric, which has been frayed and torn and completely destroyed on multiple occasions, reweaves itself with a speed that suggests either an extraordinary community resilience or a town that exists outside of normal consequence. This is the world the Griffins inhabit. This is the world the show has been building, piece by contradictory piece, for over 25 years. A world full of questions that the episodes drop and never retrieve. A world where the dead sometimes stay dead and sometimes don't, where the past is multiple and the future is contested, where a giant chicken fights a man over an expired coupon with the intensity and the regularity of something that matters cosmically, even though nobody has explained why. We have walked through 12 rooms tonight. We have picked up objects and turned them over and set them down. We have listened for the sounds that the house makes when it thinks nobody is paying attention. The Griffins are asleep at 31 Spooner Street. Or they are not asleep. Or they are awake in a version of this world that we cannot access from here. Stewie is in his room, possibly building something, possibly just lying in his crib looking at the ceiling and thinking about the universe that he knows, in a way that nobody else in the house knows, that he made. Brian is wherever he is, his drink finished or unfinished, the gun in its vault across town, the novel on his desk in whatever state it is currently in. The years of his life arranged around him like furniture in a room that never quite looks the way he intended it to look when he moved in. Peter is probably asleep. He sleeps deeply, the way people sleep who have made peace with their own limitations, or who have never been aware enough of them to lie awake. Lois is at the piano, maybe, in the quiet part of the night, playing something that nobody has ever heard her play before. And somewhere in the neighborhood, Quahog turns on its axis, regenerating and forgetting and accumulating new mysteries the way all places accumulate them, in the spaces between what they show you and what they keep. The street is quiet. The lights are going off one by one. The questions do not resolve. They settle slowly into the specific category of things that are better at night than they are in the daylight. Things that acquire texture and weight in the quiet, that become more real rather than less real when the rest of the world goes soft and still. Let these questions carry you somewhere restful tonight. Let the unresolved threads of this world that has been running for 25 years become the sound of a place that has not finished its story. Let the drunken clam and the house on Spooner Street and the closet with the monkey and the vault with the gun, and the baby with the time machine and the woman at the piano and the chicken who always opens one eye at the end become the landscape of the hours between now and morning. Quahog will still be there when you wake up. The questions will still be there. And so will the show, in whatever season it has reached by then, still dropping threads and leaving rooms and creating the kind of mystery that only comes from a place that has been lived in long enough to develop its own shadows. Sleep well. The Griffins are home. The street is quiet. And somewhere in Rhode Island, a giant chicken is opening one eye. If this kind of long, deep dive into animated worlds keeps you up in the best possible way, go ahead and hit subscribe so you don't miss what's coming next. Leave a like if you made it this far, because that genuinely means something to this channel. And if you want to keep the conversation going, drop a comment telling me which of these mysteries you have been thinking about since you first noticed it. Because the comments section on these videos always end up being the most interesting part. Until next time, from whoever you are reading this in whatever corner of the world you have settled into for the night, thank you for being here. The light on Spooner Street is still on. Section 13. The Stewie and Brian Road Trips. What they found and what they left behind the read. Road to episodes are their own category within the Family Guy archive. They are the episodes where the show strips away the Spooner Street infrastructure, takes two of its most interesting characters, and drops them into a situation that requires genuine collaboration and genuine mutual reliance. The first of these, Road to Rhode Island in Season 2, is one of the most beloved episodes in the show's entire history. It begins with Stewie needing to travel from his grandparents' house back to Quahog after Brian forgets to pick him up, and it becomes something far stranger and more emotionally substantial than that premise suggests. In the course of the episode, Stewie and Brian visit the farm in Texas where Brian's mother, Biscuit, lives. Or lived. Brian discovers that Biscuit died years earlier, that he never had a chance to say anything to her that mattered, and that the mother who gave him away so he could have a better life never got to know whether the better life materialized. He stands in that field in Texas and processes something that the show, in its earlier seasons, was willing to actually process, rather than immediately diffusing with a joke. Brian grieves. Stewie watches. The friendship between them deepens in that moment into something that the comedy never quite has the right vocabulary for. What happened to Biscuit? The show tells us she died and that she is gone, but the circumstances are vague. She gave Brian away from a puppy mill in Houston. She had other puppies. She built whatever life she could in the circumstances she was in. And then she was gone before Brian ever made the trip back to find her. This is a loss that should have permanently altered Brian's emotional landscape, and in the early seasons, it does. The Brian who returns from that Texas field is slightly different from the Brian who left for Texas. He carries something new. The road to episodes that follow carry this quality in different proportions. Road to Europe takes them to London and then to Saudi Arabia in an episode that is more interested in its own chaos than in the friendship at its center, but the bones of the dynamic are present. Road to Rupert takes the format and uses it to explore the idea of Stewie's attachment to his stuffed bear, Rupert, and what that attachment means in the context of a baby who also knows how to build thermonuclear devices. Road to Germany takes them to 1940s Europe during the Holocaust, which is the episode where the format most clearly exceeds its own comedic ambition and becomes something genuinely uncomfortable in the best way. Stewie and Brian navigate one of history's worst periods together. They see things, they make choices, they come home. What do they bring back from Germany? What does it mean for Stewie Griffin, who will grow up in a world defined partly by the legacy of that specific historical atrocity, to have been physically present in it? What does it mean for Brian, who is old enough and intelligent enough to have historical awareness of what that period produced, to have walked through the middle of it? The show acknowledges neither of these questions. The episode ends, the timeline is restored, and both characters return to Quahog without any indication that the experience permanently registered. But the experience happened within the show's internal logic. It was real. Stewie and Brian were in Nazi Germany during the Holocaust. They saw what they saw. They did what they had to do to get home. That knowledge is in them, somewhere in the same place where Stewie keeps his awareness of having caused the Big Bang, and Brian keeps his knowledge of the gun in the vault. The Road to Episodes are the show at its most honest, in a particular way. They are the episodes where the writers seem most aware of who these characters actually are and what they actually feel about each other, as opposed to what the situation comedy mechanics require them to feel. Brian and Stewie, the Season 8 Bank Vault episode, is the culmination of this strand, the episode where the show abandons the road trip format and the adventure structure entirely and just puts these two characters in a room and lets them talk. What they talk about is everything. They talk about the gun. They talk about what Brian actually wants from his life and the gap between the life he is living and the life he wanted. Stewie talks about what Brian means to him in a way that the show usually only approaches obliquely through the structure of the jokes and the consistency of the relationship. In the vault, the oblique angle is gone. Stewie is direct. He says that he is glad Brian is alive. He says that Brian's life has value to him. He says this not in the way of a baby performing an emotion he has been taught to perform, but in the way of someone who has thought about it and knows it to be true. The mystery of the Road to Episodes is what they represent in the arc of a show that does not do arcs. They are isolated instances of something building over time. Across more than a decade, across many episodes, two characters who are fundamentally unlike each other have been developing a friendship that the show does not know how to fully contain. Every Road to Episode adds another layer to that friendship. Every return from those adventures deposits something in the relationship that stays, even when the show's general resistance to growth erases most evidence of it. When Brian dies in the Season 12 episode, the grief that Stewie experiences is not the grief of a baby losing a pet. It is the grief of someone who has been to Germany and back with this person, who has been to Germany and to Las Vegas and to England and to Rhode Island and through the bank vault, who has used the time machine more times than he can count and always come back to the same person waiting on the other side. The mystery is not whether this friendship is real. It is. The mystery is why the show cannot decide what to do with something so real. Why it periodically detonates the relationship and then reconstructs it, as though testing its own limits. Whether the repeated cycles of rupture and repair in the Brian and Stewie dynamic are the show's way of keeping the friendship feeling earned, or whether they are the show forgetting what it has built. The road trips have stopped being a regular feature of the show in recent seasons. The format was used extensively during the show's middle period, and has become less frequent as the show has aged. The last major Road to Episode is a memory now, an artifact of a specific creative period when the show had enough confidence in these two characters to strip everything away and see what was left. What was left was a friendship that survived Germany. That is not nothing. That is, in the context of animated television, something extraordinary. Section 14. The House at 31 Spooner Street. What the address knows. The house has been on fire. It has been burgled. It has been haunted in the Petergeist episode by forces related to the Native American burial ground that Peter accidentally disturbed while building a pool in the backyard, which is itself a mystery because the logistics of accidentally building a pool on a burial ground suggest a level of geological inattention that even Peter's capacities should not permit. The house has been occupied by a bear. It has been visited by death. It has been the site of Stewie's laboratory, Brian's drinking, Chris's closet terror, Meg's bedroom isolation, and thousands of dinners that Lois has prepared in a kitchen that gets destroyed and restored on what is essentially a weekly schedule. Let us talk about the house itself. 31 Spooner Street was apparently paid for in full by Carter Pewterschmidt, which is a detail revealed in the season 16 episode, Throw It Away, and which restructures every earlier episode in which financial hardship played a role. The Griffins struggling to make ends meet, Peter losing his job, Lois taking on extra work. All of these episodes exist in a world where the underlying reality was that Lois's father was quietly funding the foundation of their existence. What this means for Peter's sense of himself as a provider, his identity as the man who takes care of his family, is something the show acknowledges in the episode and then does not follow up on. Carter does not hold this over them in any visible way in subsequent episodes. The revelation is made and then the show continues as if the dynamic has not been fundamentally altered, which is the show's standard approach to revelations about the fine financial structure of the Griffin household. But the question remains, the house that Peter Griffin has been walking around in and crashing through and setting on fire for 25 years was never really his house, in the sense that he never really paid for it. It was a gift from a man who has spent 25 years making clear that he doesn't consider Peter worthy of the gift. The layout of the house is, like most things in the show, inconsistent across episodes. Rooms appear and disappear. The basement has been finished and unfinished across different seasons. The attic has been inhabited and empty. The garage has contained things that a standard suburban garage should not contain, and then been shown as unremarkably ordinary in the following episode. This is standard animated sitcom geography, where the house serves the episode rather than the episode serving the house. But certain details are stable. The piano in the living room is always there. The kitchen table is always there. The stairs going up to the second floor are always there. The fireplace, which Peter has used for burning things he should not burn, is always there. These are the load-bearing elements of the house's visual identity, the pieces that tell you in any given episode that you are in the right place. And Stewie's room. Stewie's room is always there. It is a child's room in most respects. It has a crib, which a baby of Stewie's intelligence clearly does not need for sleep, but maintains presumably because the alternative would require explanations to Lois that he has decided are not worth having. It has a changing table. It has the kinds of colors and shapes and textures that pediatric designers believe are appropriate for developing minds. And somewhere in it, usually implied to be under the floorboards or behind a panel that looks like an ordinary wall, is a laboratory containing equipment that should require a university physics department to operate. The time machine, the shrink ray, the return pad, the various other devices that Stewie has constructed over the years, usually in the context of episodes that forget they exist in subsequent episodes. The laboratory is Stewie's real room. The baby decor is the disguise he maintains because the alternative would require explanations to Lois that he has decided are not worth having. There is a question about when Stewie does his work. When does a 1-year-old build a functioning time machine? Not during daylight hours when the family is awake and present. Not during meals. Not during the structured activities that a baby's day contains. The construction happens somewhere in the hours of the night, in the dark of a house that is theoretically asleep, while the rest of the family does not know what is happening in the room at the end of the hall. What does the house hear at night? The soft sounds of extraordinary invention. The kind of quiet that comes from a baby who is not sleeping, but is working, carefully and methodically, on something that will not be understood by anyone outside that room. The house at 31 Spooner Street contains multitudes. It contains a drunk and brilliant dog, and an evil and softening genius baby, and a teenager who might be the most resilient person in the household, and a 13-year-old boy with a monkey in his closet, and two parents whose love for each other has been tested so many times that the testing has become its own form of proof. And it contains all of their mysteries, stacked on top of each other like the rings inside a tree, marking the years. Section 15. The brewery, the bar, and the jobs that never last. Peter Griffin's professional life as unexplained mystery. Peter Griffin has been employed at a remarkable number of places across the course of the show. He worked at the Happy-Go-Lucky Toy Factory in the early seasons, a job that involved testing toys and that produced a series of workplace injury incidents that the show treated as comedy, but that, from a professional liability standpoint, should have resulted in the toy factory's closure and Peter's permanent disability status. He was fired from this job and subsequently employed at the Pawtucket Patriot Brewery, which is where he has been stationed for most of the show's post-revival history. The brewery is a significant location. It produces Pawtucket Patriot Ale, which is Peter's preferred beverage and which is apparently available at every bar and liquor store in Quahog. Peter works there in a capacity that the show has never precisely defined. He is not management. He is not clearly labor in the traditional sense. He occupies some intermediate position that allows him to be present on the factory floor and also to be the kind of employee who can leave in the middle of a shift when something more interesting is happening outside. He has been fired from the brewery multiple times. He has also been rehired without explanation in subsequent episodes. The brewery employs several other characters across the show's history, including a man named Opie who has been Peter's co-worker since the show's early seasons and who has the particular quality of most background characters in the show, which is that he exists when the scene needs him and does not exist when it does not. The question of how Peter keeps getting rehired after being fired is related to a broader question about how Peter maintains any employment at all. He is, by most objective measures, a terrible employee. He lacks the attention span for complex tasks. He is frequently distracted. He causes property damage. He has brought personal conflicts and personal chaos into workplace settings in ways that should have resulted in permanent records and difficult references, and yet, the brewery keeps taking him back. The toy factory tolerated him for multiple seasons before the cancellation ended the storyline. Various other employers across the show's history have given Peter Griffin chances that the facts of his employment history do not justify. One possible explanation, which the show has not offered, but which is consistent with its internal logic, is that Peter is genuinely irreplaceable in one specific way. He has an extraordinary tolerance for industrial-level drinking. His ability to consume and metabolize alcohol is, by the evidence of multiple episodes, genuinely exceptional, even within a show where heavy drinking is treated as a recreational standard. At a brewery, an employee who can personally evaluate every product with total enthusiasm and apparent no lasting consequence consumption is, in a specific and narrow sense, an asset. The other jobs are more mysterious. At various points, Peter has been a fisherman, a farmer, a television personality, a financial advisor, a pirate, a country western singer, a soldier, and several other occupations that the show visits briefly and then abandons. Each of these occupational detours suggests a version of Peter that the show could have explored at length and chose not to. The fisherman Peter is a different character from the brewery Peter. The television personality. Peter exists in a different relationship to ambition and performance than the man who drinks beer with his friends at the Drunken Clam. These alternative Peters are like the windows of a house you drive past at night. You can see the light inside, you can see the shape of something, but you cannot see what is actually happening, and by the time you have processed the glimpse, you are already past the house and the darkness has closed behind you. Peter has also, at various points, demonstrated competence that his standard characterization should not permit. He successfully ran a small business. He successfully completed tasks requiring sustained attention and physical skill. He is, when the episode requires it, capable of exceeding his apparent limits. The mystery is not what Peter does for work. The mystery is who Peter Griffin would be if the show had allowed him to find work that actually engaged his genuine capabilities rather than his worst tendencies. If the toy factory or the brewery or any of the other places had looked at Peter Griffin and asked the question that the show never quite gets around to asking, which is, what are you actually good at? The answer to that question, which the show has assembled across hundreds of episodes in fragments and implications, is something like this. Peter is good at caring about things. When he cares about something, really cares about it, he pursues it with a level of commitment that occasionally borders on the obsessive and occasionally produces results that the people around him did not expect. He is good at loyalty, in the way that loyalty sometimes looks identical to stubbornness. He is good at enjoying things, genuinely enjoying them, in a way that many people who are more intelligent and more accomplished have lost the ability to do. These are not nothing. These are, in fact, the specific qualities that make Peter Griffin a character worth watching, rather than simply a character worth laughing at. The mystery is not what he is. The mystery is what he might have become if anyone in his life had pointed at those qualities early enough and said, here, build something out of this. Section 16. The Swanson Enigma. Joe's legs, Joe's career, and what he carries. Joe Swanson arrived on Spooner Street in the Season 1 episode, A Hero Sits Next Door, and when he arrived, he changed the social chemistry of the neighborhood. He was wheelchair-bound, but he was also everything that the other residents of Spooner Street were not. He was athletic. He was capable. He was a decorated police officer who had been paralyzed in the line of duty, and the injury had cost him mobility but had not touched his strength or his capability or the particular quality of genuine heroism that the episode introduces him with. Peter was jealous of Joe from the moment they met. Not because Joe was a threat, but because Joe represented a version of what a man could be that Peter was aware he did not represent. Joe had the respect of the neighborhood. Joe had accomplished things. Joe had a story that people wanted to hear and a presence that made rooms feel different when he entered them. And then the show softened Joe. Gradually, the same way it softened or hardened or distorted every character over the course of its long history. Joe went from being the impressive neighbor to being the butt of jokes about his disability. He went from being the person everyone admired to being the person everyone mocked. Peter, who had been jealous of Joe's status, became one of the primary people undermining it. The mystery of Joe Swanson is not how he ended up in the wheelchair. That much the show has actually addressed, eventually. In the Season 7 episode Joe's Revenge, it is revealed that the incident that paralyzed him involved a criminal named Bobby Briggs, and that Joe has harbored a desire for justice that has never fully been satisfied. This is the backstory. This is the thing he carries. But what Joe carries that the show has never fully explored is the particular psychology of someone who was physically extraordinary and then became physically limited. Joe was, before his injury, a person whose body was his primary professional tool. He was a law enforcement officer who relied on speed, strength, and physical capability to do his job. He was the man who ran toward danger instead of away from it, who put himself between harm and other people with a physical confidence that the wheelchair has since modified, but not eliminated. What does it mean to be Joe Swanson? To have been one person in one body and to have become, through an event you did not choose, a different version of yourself in a different set of capabilities? The show explores this in the occasional episode where Joe's disability is the focus rather than the background. In Believe It or Not, Joe's Walking on Air, Joe receives leg transplants that restore his ability to walk and immediately begins distancing himself from the people in his life who knew him as disabled. He becomes someone else, someone the neighborhood does not quite recognize. This episode raises and then resolves the question too neatly. Joe gets his legs. Joe becomes someone different and worse. Joe loses his legs again, is restored to himself. The message is that Joe's disability is who he is, that removing it removes something essential, and that the person he was while walking was less genuinely himself than the person he is in the wheelchair. But that resolution flattens something genuinely complex. Joe is not defined by his disability, but he has been shaped by it in ways that are real and irreversible. The man who joined the police force before the injury is not the same man who goes to work every day in a department that he has served for decades. The relationship between those two versions of himself is not something the show has been willing to sit with. There is also the matter of Joe's marriage to Bonnie, which has been one of the show's ongoing domestic storylines. Bonnie was pregnant for what the show eventually acknowledged was an unusually long time, a joke about the show's refusal to age its characters that eventually produced a daughter named Susie. Their son Kevin was established as having died in Iraq in one episode, and then returned alive in a later episode, which is another example of the show's occasional amnesia about what it has previously established. Bonnie's relationship with Joe has been depicted at various points as affectionate, strained, near divorce, recovered, and resigned. She is not a character who has been given the depth that her position in the narrative should warrant. She is the wife of one of the show's central characters, a person with her own history and her own perspective and her own experience of life on Spooner Street, and she exists mostly as a satellite around Joe rather than as a character in her own right. What does Bonnie think about? What does she want, not in the context of any particular episode, but across the span of the show's run? She married a man who was then paralyzed. She has raised children in a household shaped by that disability and by the specific psychology of a man who defines himself through his work and his physical capability and has had to renegotiate both. She has lived on Spooner Street for over 25 years, which means she has witnessed every catastrophe and comedy that the neighborhood has produced. And she has had a front row seat to it all without ever being asked what she thinks about it. The mystery of the Swanson house is the mystery of everyone on Spooner Street, which is that the show has built a world rich enough to contain lives that are more complex than the episodes are able to hold. Joe and Bonnie are two of those lives. Their story has been told in fragments across a quarter century of episodes, and the fragments do not add up to a complete picture. And the gaps between the fragments are where the real story lives. Section 17, The Cleveland Departure. What happened when a friend left Cleveland? Brown was one of the original four. Peter, Quagmire, Joe, Cleveland. They drank at the Drunken Clam together. They watched each other's lives from a distance that was close enough to feel, but not so close as to be uncomfortable. They were, in the specific way of American male friendship as the show depicted it, men who cared about each other through the medium of proximity and shared activity, rather than through direct expression of anything feeling-shaped. Cleveland left. His wife, Loretta, had an affair with Quagmire, a development that the show handled with more emotional weight than it usually brought to any individual storyline. The affair ended the marriage. Cleveland packed up and left Quahog, taking his son Cleveland Jr. with him, moving to Stool Bend, Virginia, to be near his high school sweetheart Donna and her children, starting over in the way that people start over when the life they had turns out to be built on ground that was not as solid as it looked. He got his own show. The Cleveland Show ran from 2009 to 2013 on Fox, occupying the Sunday night animation block and exploring Cleveland's new life in Virginia, with a cast that was built around the premise that Cleveland, in a new environment, could be something other than what he was in the periphery of the Griffin family's story. He could be a father, a husband, a man with his own concerns rather than just a supporting character in someone else's concerns. The Cleveland Show ended after 4 seasons. Cleveland came back to Quahog. And when he came back, the show largely treated his absence as a thing that had happened rather than a thing that had consequences. The friendship group reconstituted itself. Peter and Quagmire and Joe welcomed Cleveland back without extended conversations about what his departure had meant or what had changed in the years of his absence. The drunken clam table had 4 chairs again. But something is unresolved in the arithmetic of what happened while Cleveland was gone. He was not present for some of the most significant events of the show's middle period. The death and return of Meg Griffin happened while Cleveland was in Virginia. Various crises on Spooner Street unfolded without the person who was in the original formation of the friend group, perhaps the most emotionally steady and most genuinely warm. What Peter and Quagmire and Joe experienced in Cleveland's absence is something the show has never fully investigated, because the show's relationship with the emotional history is selective. There is also the matter of Quagmire and the affair. Quagmire slept with Cleveland's wife. This is not a small thing. This is the kind of betrayal that in ordinary life produces rifts that do not heal. In the show, what did it produce? Cleveland's departure, and then, years later, Cleveland's return, and the gradual restoration of the friendship as if the wound had healed cleanly. Whether it actually healed, whether the scar tissue is still there in the way that scar tissue always is something the show has chosen not to examine. Every time Quagmire and Cleveland share a scene in the later seasons, there is a question underneath it. Does Cleveland think about it? Does Quagmire think about it? Is the ease of the restored friendship genuine or performed? And if performed, by whom and for what audience? The show does not ask. It places the 4 of them at the drunken clam table and lets the comedy happen, and the history sits underneath the table, unacknowledged, the way histories usually do. The Cleveland Show itself is a mystery in the context of Quahog. It introduced characters and storylines, and a version of Cleveland's life that existed for 4 years of production, but that has been largely set aside since his return. The children from his second marriage, the relationships built in Virginia, the person he became when he was not in the shadow of Peter Griffin's particular kind of chaos. None of this has been integrated into his reappearance on Spooner Street with any thoroughness. The Cleveland Brown who drinks at the Drunken Clam in the current seasons has 4 years of television biography that the Quahog portion of the show has mostly treated as a parenthesis. He went away, he came back, and the show picked up where it left off. But people who go away and come back are not the same people who left. The Stool Bend years made Cleveland someone different, in ways both seen and unseen. And the reunion with the friend group has never quite accounted for those differences. Section 18. The many deaths of Quahog, when the town has ended and begun again. It began, so far as the show is concerned, with the Big Bang. God's flatulence, in the show's origin story told in The Griffin Family History, created the universe. From there, across billions of years of unwitnessed development, the Griffin lineage traces itself through a caveman who invented the wheel, through a Moses figure, through the colonial period, through slavery, through the Roaring Twenties, through the mid-20th century, and arrives at Peter Griffin standing in a toy factory in the late 1990s, full of beer and good intentions and a profound inability to identify when something is a terrible idea before it becomes one. Quahog as a settlement is itself founded, according to the season 6 episode Peter's Progress, by an ancestor of Peter who was banished from England and made his way to Rhode Island and established a community there. This means that the town's origins are bound up with the Griffin name from the beginning, that the place has been Peter's, in some ancestral sense, since its founding. And yet Quahog has died, or come close to dying, or been fundamentally altered, or been erased and reset more times than any legitimate town could absorb, without becoming a fundamentally different kind of place. The nuclear apocalypse of Da Boom, which we have discussed, is the most total of these destructions. The comet threat in Season 6, the zombie outbreak that various episodes have implied or depicted, the various alien incursions, supernatural events, and acts of God that have befallen the town over 25 years. Each of these should have changed Quahog permanently. Each was followed by an episode in which Quahog was unchanged. This pattern is sometimes explained within the show as a result of things being restored through supernatural or science-fictional means. Stewie's time machine has been used at least twice to prevent town-wide catastrophes, whether or not the show explicitly acknowledges this as the mechanism. Death himself, as a recurring character, presumably exercises some control over how many people in Quahog actually die on any given catastrophic occasion. But there's a more interesting explanation, one that the show itself has never offered, but that is suggested by its own cosmology. Quahog may be special, not special in the sense of deserving protection, but special in the sense that the town occupies a position in the show's universe that requires its continued existence. It is the place where Stewie Griffin was born, and Stewie Griffin, as we have established, is the cause of the Big Bang. The universe requires Stewie to exist. Stewie requires Quahog to exist as the place of his birth. Therefore, through some protective principle of temporal predestination, Quahog can't be permanently destroyed. This is speculative, but it is the kind of speculation that the show's own mythology supports. If Stewie is cosmologically necessary, and if his existence is tied to this specific location, then the resilience of Quahog may not be coincidental. It may be baked into the universe itself. The town has a news team that documents its disasters. Tom Tucker and the rotating cast of co-anchors and field reporters who have covered every catastrophe from every angle, presenting events to a viewership that by all rights should have evacuated permanently by the show's 6th or 7th season. The news team continues, the residents continue, the drunken clam continues. Whatever breaks in Quahog gets fixed, because Quahog needs to be there for the next episode, and the episode after that, all the way through to whatever season is currently airing on whatever night the network has decided to air it. The town is, in this sense, immortal. Not through any particular strength of its own, but through necessity. It exists because the story requires it to exist. And the story requires it to exist because the story is, in some essential way, about what happens when you put these specific people in this specific place and let the chaos of their existence run in real time, week after week, for as long as anyone is willing to watch. Section 19. What the show has been saying all along, the mystery underneath the mysteries. There is a theory, one of the most discussed in the fan community around Family Guy, that takes all of the show's inconsistencies and impossibilities and resets and treats them not as writing failures or continuity errors, but as symptoms of a specific condition. The theory goes like this. Peter Griffin is in a coma. He has been in a coma since sometime in the early seasons, possibly since an accident that the show has never directly shown, possibly since Meg's drunk driving caused a crash that killed Lois and left him in a hospital room somewhere in Rhode Island. everything we watch, the Griffin family, the Drunken Clam, Quagmire, and Joe and Cleveland and Ernie, and the Drunken Clam, and all of it is the ongoing dream of a man who cannot wake up. The inconsistencies are features of the dream rather than failures of the writing. Things reset because dreams reset. Characters behave in ways that do not fully cohere because dreamed people do not fully cohere. The rules change from episode to episode because the rules of a dream are determined by whatever the dreamer needs from the moment, rather than by any external standard of consistency. In this theory, the real Meg is beautiful and popular, the most enviable teenager in her high school. Peter dreams her as unpopular and abused because he resents her for the accident, the drunk driving, the moment that cost him everything. The real Chris has an intellectual disability, but Peter dreams him as merely awkward because the truth of Chris's condition is something he cannot face even in dreams. Stewie is the child who never got to be born, whose mother died before he arrived. So Peter has invented him as both a genius and an infant, because those are the two extremes of the relationship he did not get to have. And Brian does not talk. Brian barks. But in Peter's dream, Brian speaks, because Peter needs someone in that house who will tell him the truth. And the truth teller has to be someone who cannot hold him responsible for having failed to listen earlier. This is a sad theory. It is also, by the logic it applies to itself, a theory that cannot be disproven from inside the show. Because if the show is Peter's dream, then everything the show does that might seem to contradict the theory is also part of the dream. The theory is constructed to be unfalsifiable. But even setting aside the unfalsifiability, the theory does something useful. It asks the question that the show has been avoiding since at least season 4, which is, what is this about? Not what are the jokes about, not what are the plot lines about, but what is the show as a whole, as an accumulated 25-year project, actually saying? The answer that the coma theory implies is one of grief and guilt and the specific way that the human mind protects itself from the full weight of both. Peter Griffin, in this reading, is a man who lost everything and built a world in which nothing can be permanently lost because the pain of permanent loss is unbearable. A world where Brian can die and come back, where Quahog can be nuked and rebuilt, where relationships can break and mend and break again without ever quite breaking for good, where the giant chicken always opens one eye and the fights are never quite over, and the chaos always resolves into another episode where everyone is back at the table. This reading of the show is not what the show intended. Seth MacFarlane built Family Guy as a comedy about a dysfunctional family, drawing on his own experience of New England working-class culture and the specific archetypes of large, loud, opinionated Irish Catholic households that his father moved through. He did not set out to build a meditation on grief and the architecture of protective dreaming. But 25 years of storytelling has its own momentum. The things a show accumulates over that much time begin to mean things that nobody consciously chose. The pattern of deaths and returns, the pattern of lessons learned and immediately forgotten, the pattern of warmth offered and withdrawn and offered again. These are not arbitrary. They describe something. They describe the specific texture of a world that is trying to be stable in the face of forces that keep threatening to unmake it. What the show has been saying all along, whether it knows it or not, is that love is a practice that requires more endurance than any individual has a right to have, and that the people who keep practicing it, who keep showing up and choosing the people they love, even when the evidence for doing so is thin, are the most remarkable and the most ordinary people in the world at the same time. Lois is still choosing Peter. Every episode, by her presence, by the fact that she is still there in the kitchen, and at the piano, and at the dinner table, she is choosing him. The mystery of why she keeps choosing him is the mystery of every relationship that has outlasted the evidence of its own good judgment. It is not a solvable mystery. It is a real one. Brian is still in that house. After everything the show has done to him, after every bad decision and every hypocritical speech and every relationship he has ruined and every friendship he has tested, he is still on that couch, still drinking his martini, still reaching for the laptop to work on the novel that he has been writing his entire adult life. The mystery of what keeps Brian there in that house with these people is the mystery of belonging, of choosing a place because it is yours, even when it is inconvenient, even when the people in it are difficult, even when the parts of yourself that you most admire are not the parts that this life requires. Stewie is still in his crib. The most powerful being in the universe, the entity without whom nothing would exist. The child who caused the Big Bang and traveled to the Renaissance and navigated the Holocaust and knows the exact mechanism by which the universe was created, is still in his crib in his room at the end of the hall, waiting for morning, waiting for Lois to come in and pick him up and carry him to breakfast. And somewhere in his closet, or wherever the time machine currently lives, or wherever he has stored the evidence of everything he knows and everything he can do, Stewie Griffin knows something about patience that nobody has ever asked him to articulate. He could leave. He has the means. He is, in every practical sense, more capable than everyone in this house and most people in this world. But he stays. He waits. He chooses the crib and the house and the people again and again, episode after episode. Maybe that is the mystery that contains all the others. Not why does the show fail to resolve its threads, but why do these characters keep choosing each other, despite everything? Why do people choose the difficult things? Why do they choose the houses that burn down, and the friendships that break, and the loves that require more than love is supposed to require? The show does not answer this. But 25 years of it has made the question more specific and more weighted with lived experience than it would be if it were asked in the abstract. It is not why do people in general keep choosing difficult things. It is why does this particular woman keep choosing this particular man on this particular street in this particular town? Why does this particular dog keep returning to this particular house? Why does this particular baby, who is the cause of all existence, keep choosing to be a baby on Spooner Street? The answer, if it exists, lives somewhere in the 150 episodes of early Family Guy that the show at its best was reaching toward in the warmth that the first 3 seasons managed. Before the writing changed and the warmth was harder to find. It lives in the episodes where someone said something honest and meant it. Where a family that should not work worked anyway, briefly, in the way that things that should not work sometimes do. That is the deepest mystery of Family Guy. Not the chicken or the time machine or the ancestry or the deaths or the returns. Not the inconsistencies or the drop threads or the questions that got raised and never answered. The deepest mystery is the warmth. Where it went, whether it is still there somewhere in the house, whether Lois, sitting at the piano at midnight, is playing something that proves it still exists. I believe it does. I think it is in the way Brian says goodnight to Stewie, on the nights when the episode allows him to say it like he means it. It is in the way Peter looks at Lois in the seconds before the joke comes and ruins the moment. It is in the way Meg holds herself together in the episodes where holding herself together is all that is available to her, and she does it anyway. The mystery is there. It is the mystery of people who love each other in difficult circumstances, trying to do that as well as they can, which is imperfectly and inconsistently, and with far more chaos than anyone intended, but also with more genuine feeling than the jokes admit. Quahog is quiet tonight. Spooner Street is dark. The questions do not resolve. The house is warm. The piano might be playing. If you have followed this all the way to the end, you are the kind of person this channel exists for, and I mean that. Hit subscribe so we can do this again with something else. Leave a like, leave a comment, tell me which of these threads you want pulled further, and tell me where in the world you are watching from. Until next time, from wherever we both are, rest well. The light on Spooner Street is still on. Section 20. The Griffin Children and Their Missing Futures. Chris, the Darkness, and What Nobody Talks About. Chris Griffin is 13 years old. He has been 13 years old for 25 years of broadcast history. He is, on the surface, the simplest of the Griffin children to understand. He is awkward, enthusiastic, not especially academic, capable of surprising warmth, and possessed of a gift for drawing that the show introduces in the earliest seasons and then gradually forgets across the post-revival run, the way the show forgets most things that do not have an obvious comedic application. Chris draws. This is one of the show's most interesting and most neglected character details. He has genuine artistic talent. Not the talent of someone who is decent at art classes, but the talent of someone who has something particular to say through a visual medium and the technical ability to begin saying it. In the episode, "A Picture's Worth $1,000, his artwork attracts the attention of a New York gallery owner who recognizes something real in what Chris produces. He is 13 and already drawing things that adults in the art world find worth their attention. And then the show mostly lets this go. Chris's art appears occasionally as a background detail, a piece pinned to his wall, or a notebook open on his desk. The gallery storyline does not produce a lasting change in how Chris is treated within the family or the school environment. His father, who in that episode demonstrates the particular kind of sabotage that comes from a parent who cannot separate their own needs from their child's opportunity, interferes in a way that should have produced lasting resentment from Chris and did not. The mystery of Chris Griffin is the mystery of a kid who is more talented than the people around him recognize, who is kind in ways that the family's chaos has not fully managed to extinguish, who is sometimes the funniest person in the room by accident, and who has been shaped by a closet that contained a profoundly unhappy monkey for years without anyone believing him. What does it do to a child's epistemology, to his fundamental relationship with believing what he perceives, to have a real and genuine experience that his family dismisses as fantasy? Chris had a monkey in his closet. He told people. They laughed. He knew what he knew, and the people who were supposed to help him process the world told him that what he knew was not true. This is a small version of a large dynamic, and the large dynamic is that Chris Griffin has been learning across the course of the show's history to distrust his own perception of reality in a household that frequently requires you to decide what is real and what is not. He also has the inherited complication of Herbert, the neighbor who has spent years orbiting him with intentions that the show acknowledges are not benign. Every child in Chris's position, with that specific neighbor and that specific dynamic, needs something from the adults in his life that the adults in Chris's life are not reliably equipped to provide. Peter is too self-involved. Lois is managing too many other crises. Brian is not really positioned as a protective figure for Chris in the way he is for Stewie. Meg is dealing with her own situation. Chris navigates this alone in the particular way that children in chaotic households learn to navigate things alone. He develops coping mechanisms that the show treats as character quirks, the awkwardness and the occasional non sequiturs, and the way he processes difficult situations through the lens of whatever entertainment he has most recently consumed. He is not damaged, not irreversibly. He is shaped by his circumstances in ways that are not always flattering and not always noticed. The mystery of Chris Griffin, which the show has never fully approached, is what kind of adult he will be. The drawing, the kindness, the occasional moments of genuine insight that arrive without warning in episodes that did not seem to be building toward them. These are the building blocks of something the show has declined to construct. There is a future Chris Griffin who is not the awkward 13-year-old bouncing around the house on Spooner Street. There is a future Chris Griffin who carries the art and the kindness and the specific education and absurdity that living in that household provides, and who builds something out of all of it. That person exists in the same infinity of possible timelines, where the better version of Meg exists and the version of Brian who finished his novel exists. We just cannot see him from here. Section 21. The mythology of the drunken clam. What that bar really is, every mythology has a gathering place, a location that holds the center of the social world, where the significant conversations happen, where the relationships are tested and maintained and occasionally broken beyond repair. In Family Guy, that place is the Drunken Clam. The Drunken Clam is, on its face, an ordinary New England bar. It has bar stools and a long wooden bar and televisions showing sports and a demographic that skews toward the kind of working-class men who would be comfortable in a place like that. It has a jukebox in some episodes and not in others. It has a pool table that appears when needed. It is lit with the specific quality of amber light that bars and animated shows always seem to have. The light that makes everything look slightly more comfortable than it actually is. But the Drunken Clam is also a place where the rules of Peter Griffin's world are slightly suspended. At home, Peter is a husband and a father, and those roles come with obligations that he cannot entirely ignore. At work, he is an employee with a supervisor and a schedule and performance expectations. At the Drunken Clam, he is none of these things. He is Peter Griffin in his simplest form. A man with a beer and 3 friends and no particular place to be. The conversations that happen at the Drunken Clam are the ones that cannot happen anywhere else. Peter tells his friends things at that bar that he would not tell Lois at the dinner table. Quagmire reveals aspects of himself at that bar that he covers under the joke everywhere else. Joe processes things at that bar that he cannot process at home. Cleveland, when he was present, was the one who listened best and judged least and held the group together through the specific steadiness that his character represented before the show stripped most of it away. There is also something worth noting about what the Drunken Clam represents in the male friendship narrative that the show has been telling. These 4 men have known each other for the entire run of the show. They have watched each other's marriages struggle and recover and struggle again. They have been present for the births of each other's children and the deaths of parents and the loss of jobs and the various humiliations and triumphs that a life in a small Rhode Island city produces. They drink beer together. They watch sports together. They give each other terrible advice with complete confidence and absolute sincerity. And occasionally, in the episodes where the show is paying attention to what it has actually built, they love each other. Not in the ways that the show usually depicts love, with explicit acknowledgement and emotional clarity. In the way that men in that specific context love each other, which is through continued presence and reliable availability and the fact that when something genuinely bad happens, they show up. The mystery of the Drunken Clam is not what happens there. The mystery is what it would cost to lose it. What the 4 men who occupy that table would be without each other. The show has occasionally gestured at this through episodes where the friend group fractures and then reconstitutes, where someone leaves and then returns, where an argument reaches a temperature that makes you wonder if this is the fight that does not recover. But the group always reconstitutes. The bar is always there. The amber light is always on. And the 4 of them, or 3 of them when Cleveland was away, gather around their table and continue the slow, undramatic, extremely important work of being each other's witness across the years. That is not nothing. That is, in fact, everything. And the show has been building it for 25 years, one episode at a time, without ever pausing to acknowledge how much has accumulated. Section 22, The Last Mystery. Why the show keeps going and what that means. Family Guy has been renewed through season 27, which will take it to the 2028 to 2029 television season. It will reach its 30th anniversary as a running series. It is, by that point, the longest continuously running animated comedy in the history of Fox, which is the network that canceled it twice and then brought it back because the audience it built during its absence turned out to be larger and more loyal than anyone at Fox had initially estimated. The show keeps going because it is profitable. This is the simple answer. The economics of animated television are favorable to longevity. The production is cheaper than live action. The voice cast records their lines in booths rather than on elaborate sets. The animation is produced through pipelines that have been refined over decades. And the resulting product has enormous value in the syndication market, on streaming platforms, in merchandise, in the cultural ecosystem that surrounds a show that has been part of the television landscape for a quarter century. These are real reasons. They are also insufficient explanations for why the show retains any viewers at all, given the documented decline in ratings and the documented shift in quality that even the show itself has occasionally acknowledged through fourth-wall-breaking jokes about its own continued existence. The business logic explains why Fox keeps producing it. It does not explain why people keep watching it. They keep watching it because Quahog is a real place to them. Because the house at 31 Spooner Street, with all of its fires and resets and chaos, is somewhere they know how to navigate. Because the people inside it, Peter and Lois and Meg and Chris and Stewie and Brian, are people they have invested in across hundreds of episodes, people whose failures and occasional triumphs they have witnessed in real time, people who are in some sense part of the furniture of their own lives. This is the deepest and most mundane mystery of Family Guy. Not the chicken or the time machine or the ancestry or the coma theory or the question of whether Stewie knows something about himself that he has never been able to say out loud. The deepest mystery is the attachment, the specific kind of loyalty that a television audience develops toward a fictional world that has been a part of their life long enough to become a reference point rather than just entertainment. The people who grew up watching Family Guy in 1999 are in their 30s and 40s now. They have carried the show through their adolescence and their young adulthood and into whatever stage of life they are currently occupying. The house on Spooner Street has been there for all of it. Peter has been there for all of it, getting progressively less sympathetic, but somehow remaining familiar. Lois has been there. Stewie has been there, inventing things and aging not at all, his voice unchanged across decades, his intelligence still extraordinary, his relationship with the universe still the most cosmically significant secret in the history of television. The show is not great anymore in the way it was great in seasons 1 through 3 and occasionally great in the years that followed. The transcript of the show's decline is accurate, and the reasons for that decline are real and well documented. But the world it built during its great years is still there, still visible in the structure of the house and the neighborhood, and the relationships that continue to carry the weight of all those earlier episodes, even when the current episodes do not. This is what keeps it going. Not the business logic, though the business logic is necessary. The emotional architecture of a place that has been real enough, for long enough, to a large enough number of people that the continuation of its existence means something beyond its current quality. The Drunken Clam is still open. The piano is still in the living room. The closet in Chris's room still has a history. The gun is still in the vault. The time machine is still in Stewie's room behind whatever panel he built to hide it. And somewhere in the quiet of a Rhode Island night, the house at 31 Spooner Street is doing what houses do when their occupants are asleep. Settling on its foundations, keeping its secrets, being in all of its imperfect and inconsistent and occasionally brilliant and frequently frustrating complexity? A home. That is the final mystery of Family Guy. Not whether the mysteries resolve. They do not resolve. The show is too long and too inconsistent and too committed to the weekly reset for the mysteries to resolve. The final mystery is why, after all of this, the house still feels like home. Let that carry you through the night. The house is there. The light is still on. And somewhere in Quahog, in a timeline that has been branching and rejoining and splitting off into infinite variations for 25 years, the Griffins are still somehow, improbably, together. Good night. If you have stayed with this all the way to the very end, subscribe. You are the exact person this channel is for. Leave a comment below and tell me where you watched this from and what time it is, because I read every single one of them. And if there is a show or a world or a mythology you want me to do this kind of deep dive on next, tell me that too. Until next time, from wherever we both are, rest well. The light on Spooner Street is still on. Section 23. The secondary characters and their unfinished business. The world of Quahog does not consist only of the people on Spooner Street. It extends outward in every direction, populated by characters who appear with enough regularity that they feel like fixtures and who carry their own unresolved histories, the way every person in every place carries the things they have not yet finished with. Mort Goldman runs the pharmacy on the main street of Quahog. He is a Jewish pharmacist who is, by every objective measure, one of the most reliably unlucky people in the show's universe. His wife Muriel was killed in And Then There Were Fewer. His son Neil has been in love with Meg Griffin across the entire run of the show, a devotion that is never reciprocated and that the show uses primarily as a vehicle for jokes at Neil's expense without ever genuinely acknowledging the sadness of an attachment that is as faithful as it is unrewarded. Mort survived. He was at the mansion when his wife was killed. He processed that loss in subsequent episodes with a bewildered grief that the show did not sustain long enough to do justice to. And then Mort went back to running the pharmacy and showing up in episodes when a Jewish character or a pharmacy setting was required by the plot. He is a man who lost his wife to a murder, and then continued to inhabit a world that did not pause significantly for his loss. The community did not gather around him in the way that it gathered around other characters who experienced significant losses. He is just still there, behind the pharmacy counter, dispensing medications and making jokes and carrying the absence of Muriel, in a way that the show rarely bothers to illuminate. Neil Goldman is, in certain episodes, one of the most genuinely sympathetic presences in the show. He loves Meg Griffin. He loves her not in the way that the show usually depicts male interest in female characters as a transactional or comedic thing, but with the specific dogged loyalty of someone who has decided that this particular person is worth the effort, regardless of whether the effort is rewarded. He has never stopped. Across the entire run of the show, through all of Meg's various dating disasters and emotional crises, and the general chaos of her existence, Neil has been consistently present and consistently caring. He is treated as a joke. His devotion is the punchline. The show presents his attachment to Meg as evidence of his own low standards, rather than as evidence of something more interesting, which is that he might be the only person outside of the immediate family who sees Meg clearly enough to know that what she offers is worth wanting. There is an episode in the show that has never been written in which Neil and Meg have a real conversation. Not a conversation where his awkwardness is the joke or her desperate need for acceptance is the joke, but a conversation between two people who have been orbiting each other for decades in a small city, both of them slightly outside the social mainstream, both of them more themselves when nobody important is watching. That episode would tell you something real about both of them. It has not been written. It probably will not be written. But its absence is a gap in the show's architecture that is felt every time Neil appears on screen. and is used for a quick laugh about his continued attachment to a girl who does not love him back. Tom Tucker is the evening news anchor for Quahog's local television station. He has been a fixture since the beginning. He is vain, professionally competitive, and possessed of a son named Jake, whose face is upside down, a detail that the show established, and has treated with a consistency that suggests some small part of the writing room was genuinely committed to it. Tom's relationship with Jake is not warm. It is not exactly cold either. It occupies a specific register of a parent who is doing the bare minimum of parenting because the full version is beyond their current capabilities. Tom Tucker has had his professional identity threatened multiple times, most notably in the Untold story film, where Peter briefly takes over his role at the news station, and Tucker is fired before eventually being restored. He is a man whose entire sense of self is organized around being recognized, around being seen, around occupying a position that confers status and visibility. When that position is threatened, Tucker becomes erratic and petty in ways that suggest how thinly the professional identity covers whatever is underneath it. What is underneath it? The show has never looked. Tom Tucker, like most of the secondary characters in Quahog, exists in the show as a function rather than as a person. He is the news anchor, and the news anchor has a role in the episodes where a news anchor is needed, and that role does not require him to have an inner life beyond what is immediately visible. But something about the specificity of his vanity, the way the show has built him over 25 years as a man who needs to be seen in a very particular way, suggests that there is a history there. That Tom Tucker, before he was the anchor at Quahog's television station, was someone who was not seen enough. Someone who was overlooked in the specific way that produces a compensating need to be the most visible person in every room. Someone who chose a career in broadcast news, not just for the reasons most people choose careers, but for the specific psychological reason that a camera is always pointed at you, and millions of people watch. That story has never been told. Tom Tucker appears on the news desk and makes a joke and departs. His upside-down-faced son exists as a visual gag. His vanity is deployed when the plot requires comic relief. And the interior of the man remains, like most interiors in Quahog, unilluminated. Section 24. The architecture of the show's humor. What the jokes were hiding. The cutaway gag is the mechanism that Family Guy is most famous for, and we have discussed it already in the context of what it became when it was overused. But there is something to be said about what the cutaway gag was doing in its earliest incarnation, before it became a crutch, that reveals something about the show's relationship with the things it was not quite willing to say directly. A cutaway gag is, at its most essential, an interruption. Something is happening in the main story, and then something else happens for a few seconds, and then we return to the main story. The interruption is the joke. But what is being interrupted? What is the main story pausing to accommodate this fragment of something else? In the early seasons, when the cutaways were short and sharp and genuinely connected to the dialogue that prompted them, they were doing something more interesting than just providing additional jokes. They were providing a release valve for the emotional weight of the scene they were interrupting. When a moment in the main story was building towards something that the show was not quite ready to address directly, a cutaway allowed the episode to sidestep the full weight of that moment by replacing it with something funny and disconnected. This is a sophisticated piece of comedic architecture. The joke acknowledges that something real is happening without having to sit with it. The audience laughs, the scene resumes, and the moment that the cutaway interrupted has been processed at arm's length. The emotional reality has been visited but not occupied. As The show continued, the cutaways grew longer and more frequent, and more disconnected from the scenes they interrupted, until eventually the scenes were barely more than connective tissue between gags. But even in that degraded form, the basic function was the same. The cutaway was a way of not saying the thing directly, of gesturing at it from across the room. The show's humor, at its best, was doing this consistently. The jokes were about the things the characters could not say. The gags were the shapes of the feelings that the script was not going to articulate. The chicken fights were about Peter's need for physical expression that his domestic life cannot contain. The Conway Twitty gags, for all their notorious laziness, were about the show's relationship with wasted time and unfulfilled expectation, which are also, not coincidentally, themes at the center of Brian's entire arc. The extended Peter hurting his knee gag was about the specific kind of masculine refusal to admit vulnerability that Peter performs in every episode, extended to its logical conclusion until the comedy of it curdled into something that was both ridiculous and painful to watch. None of this was consciously constructed by the writers as thematic architecture. The show did not sit down and decide that the chicken fights would represent Peter's suppressed need for consequence-free violence. But 25 years of consistent patterns in a shared universe produces meaning, whether or not anyone intended it, the way any long and complex system produces emergent properties that nobody designed. The mystery of the show's humor is the mystery of what it was actually about, underneath the surface level of the jokes. What Family Guy was saying through the specific shapes of its gags and the specific targets of its satirical attention across the full sweep of its history is a question that requires more than any single essay or video can provide. But the beginning of an answer is this. It was about the specific terror of the ordinary, the fear that a life lived in a small city, in a modest house with a family that is not entirely functional, and friends who are well-meaning but limited is not enough. That it should be more, that the person you are should be bigger than the life you are living. And the comedy of the show in its best moments was the comedy of a man who wants to be more than he is, and keeps finding out that the wanting is the only thing bigger than the life, and that is still something worth laughing at, even when it hurts. That is Peter Griffin. That is the show. That is Quahog on its best nights. A place full of people who want to be more than they are, who keep finding out what they are instead, and who return to the same table at the Drunken Clam and drink the same beer and watch the same game on the same television, and somehow, through sheer persistence of presence, end up with something that matters. Final reflection. What we carry away. You have been with these characters for a long time tonight. We have walked through Quahog from one end to the other. We have stood in front of the house and looked at the light in Stewie's window. We have looked at the Drunken Clam and thought about the conversations that happen there and the ones that do not. We have thought about Ernie the giant chicken opening one eye again in the darkness after Peter walks away. What the show has given us, across its long and imperfect and sometimes magnificent and sometimes infuriating history, is not resolution. It is accumulation. 25 years of a place and its people building up like sediment, layer after layer, until the place has a depth that no individual episode could provide. Until the people have a history that transcends any single episode's capacity to contain. The mysteries remain, the chicken remains unexplained, the gun is still in the vault, the Big Bang is still Stewie's responsibility. Lois's brother is still in the asylum, and Lois still visits him once a month, and the piano is still in the living room. Meg is still waiting for her story. Brian is still waiting to finish his novel. Peter is still in the quiet episodes, somewhere between who he was and who he is. The line between them, not a break but a gradient that the show has never been willing to map completely. And Quahog is still there, regenerating and forgetting and accumulating new mysteries in the way that all places accumulate them, in the space between what they show you and what they keep. Sleep well. The house is warm. The light is still on. Bonus section. The lore you almost missed. Hidden details and background secrets. Every long-running animated show develops a body of background lore that accumulates in the details most viewers never pause to examine. Family Guy is no exception. Over 25 seasons, the writing room and the animation team have embedded specific callbacks, in-universe facts, and running gags that exist just beneath the surface of the episodes, visible only to the kind of viewer who pauses and rewinds and notices things that were designed to reward attention. Consider the question of Stewie's accent. In the earliest seasons, Stewie's British received. Pronunciation is presented as simply how he talks, with no in-universe explanation. His family does not appear to find it remarkable that their American baby speaks with an accent that suggests a mid-century English education. Various later episodes have implied that this accent is something Stewie cultivated intentionally, a performance of a persona that he built for himself as a baby, with reasons the show has never made entirely clear. In the episode where Stewie visits an alternate timeline England, the accent becomes more prominent. In episodes where Stewie is emotionally destabilized or genuinely frightened, the accent sometimes shifts towards something that sounds more American. Is the British accent armor? Is it a construction that Stewie built around himself for the same reason anyone builds a persona? Because the version of yourself without the armor is more vulnerable than you can afford to be in the specific household you have been born into? A baby who speaks like a Noel Coward character is harder to take seriously, which means that Stewie's most dangerous quality, his actual genius, is hidden by the affectation. Nobody hears the content of what he says clearly because the delivery style commands too much attention. This is the kind of observation that the show has never made explicitly, but that 2.5 decades of watching Stewie Griffin make. The accent is protection. The villain's speech patterns are camouflage. And the genuine Stewie, the one that surfaces occasionally in the bank vault episodes, and the quietest road to moments, and the episode where he uses a return pad he has not yet destroyed to save the life of his best friend, speaks with something more direct and more undefended that the British voice is normally busy covering. There is also the question of Brian's car. He drives a 2004 Toyota Prius with a bumper sticker that reads Kucinich 04, a reference to Dennis Kucinich's 2004 presidential campaign. This detail does not change. Across seasons and years of broadcast history, Brian's car remains a 2004 Prius with that specific bumper sticker, which means that Brian Griffin has been driving the same car for over 20 years in the show's internal timeline, and has maintained his support for a 2004 presidential candidate across that entire span. Either he is very committed to his politics, or he has not gotten around to replacing the bumper sticker, and given everything we know about Brian's relationship with effort and follow-through, the second option seems more likely. But the Prius is also a character detail. A 2004 Prius in 2004 was an expensive and conspicuous statement about environmental commitment. Someone who buys a Prius in 2004 is not just buying a car. They are making an argument. Brian, whose liberal politics and environmental concern have been consistent character traits since the beginning of the show, bought a car that announced his values before he had said a word. This is consistent with everything else we know about him. Brian performs his identity. He does it with the car and the martinis and the novel in progress and the name-dropping of literary references. He is a character who has always been as much about the performance of who he is as about who he actually is. The gap between the performance and the reality is where Brian's tragedy lives. The Prius says he cares about the environment. His actual behavior which includes traveling through time in ways that should have enormous carbon footprints if time travel runs on fuel, doesn't consistently reflect environmental concern. The bumper sticker stays, the behavior varies, this is human. It is also, specifically, Brian Griffin. There are dozens of these details. The specific beer brands that appear in The Drunken Clam. The way the Griffin house's exterior color has shifted slightly across seasons without any in-universe explanation. The background characters who appear in crowd scenes episode after episode, consistent fixtures of Quahog's population who have never been named or spoken, but whose faces are familiar to anyone who has watched the show closely enough. The fact that the Pawtucket Patriot Brewery has a specific and inconsistent position in the Quahog geography, sometimes appearing to be close to Spooner Street and sometimes appearing to be across town. These are the bones of a world. Not the parts that anybody planned or designed with particular care, but the parts that accumulated through the process of making the same show week after week for 25 years, until the place had more detail than any single creator intended, and more history than any single viewer could hold. Quahog is real, in the way that fictional places become real. It has a topology that real cities have, a geography that is inconsistent in the way that human memory of real places is inconsistent, a population that changes and stays the same in the way that the populations of real places do. It has a history, it has architecture, it has the specific quality of light that Rhode Island gets in the late afternoon and autumn, which the show has never explicitly named, but which you can feel in certain frames, in certain color palettes, in certain moments when the background art is doing something thoughtful. This is what a quarter century of storytelling produces. Not just episodes and characters and mysteries, but a place. A real imaginary place that you could navigate if you were dropped into it, that you could find your way around in because you have been there so many times that the streets are in you now. Part of whatever internal map you keep of the places that have mattered to you. That is the last and most complete gift that Family Guy gives you. For all its faults and all its declines and all the things it lost along the way. It gives you a place, a neighborhood, a bar with amber light and 4 chairs at a specific table, a house with a piano in the living room and a time machine behind a false panel in a baby's bedroom. You know the way. You have always known the way. The Griffins are home, and the door is unlocked, and the light on Spooner Street is still on. Now rest. Let the house do what houses do in the late hours, which is hold its memories and keep its secrets and wait for morning when the show goes on. Thank you for spending this time in Quahog. If you made it all the way here, please consider subscribing to Uncle Guy Lore and leaving a like on this video. It genuinely helps the channel grow, and it tells me that this kind of long, deep, thoughtful dive is what you want more of. Drop a comment below. Tell me where you are watching from. Tell me what unsolved mystery and Family Guy has lived in the back of your mind the longest. Tell me what show you want me to do this with next. I read every single comment. Until next time, the light is still on. A note on what we do not know. There is a specific pleasure in what has not been resolved. A story that answers all of its own questions is a story that leaves the room empty when it ends, because there is nothing left to carry with you. The questions were the weight of it. The mysteries were the furniture. And a room without furniture, no matter how well constructed, echoes. The best fictional worlds are the ones that leave you with more questions than you arrived with. Not because the storytelling was sloppy, though sometimes it was, but because the world was rich enough to generate questions that the individual episodes were too small to hold. You walk out of Quahog with more on your mind than you walked in with. And that surplus of unresolved attention is not a flaw in the design. It is the design. We do not know what Lois plays at midnight. We do not know whether the gun is still in the vault. We do not know what Ernie remembers about the punch at the dance. We do not know what Cleveland carries from the stool bend years. We do not know what Meg plans to do with all of the endurance she has built. We do not know what Stewie thinks about at 4 in the morning when the house is asleep and the time machine is quiet and the Big Bang is something he carries in his chest like a fact that cannot be shared. We do not know these things. And the not knowing is the last gift. It sends you to bed with something alive in your mind, still moving, still generating warmth like an ember in the dark. Something that will still be there in the morning, when you wake up and the questions are still open and Quahog is still there, in whatever part of your interior geography you have set aside for the places that have mattered to you. Sleep well. The light on Spooner Street is still on. It will be there in the morning.